Big discussion. 1 hour 20. Oh my god. Alright, let's do this. Josh reacts to the loss of the mid-core Yu-Gi-Oh player. Alright, as you guys know, Josh is very biased towards everything. Oh my god, look at the dislikes. You know, it's not often that Josh misses. But I will say just off the bat, before we get into this 1 hour 20 discussion, you know, of course, guys, you know, let's just say, let's keep recycling the content here. Let's keep the train going. I think what happens is Josh can sometimes allow his love of Yu-Gi-Oh to be blurred with love of the company that runs the game. And I think sometimes there's a big difference that people sometimes need to understand and recognize.
Hello, Farfa. Greetings from a new father to an advanced
Congratulations,
father smile.
Atun. I'll message you properly afterwards. That's insane. Congrats, bro. I know how you feel. There's a difference between defending Yu-Gi-Oh! Or rather criticizing Yu-Gi-Oh! As a game, but loving Yu-Gi-Oh! And criticizing the people who make it and run it. And I think sometimes that line gets a little bit blurred. Just in this discussion. Okay, so 1 hour 20. This is going to be a long one. Let's lock in.
Since we've even reacted to anything or have taken part in any sort of discourse about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game here. So I saw a little bit of a discussion over on Twitter this morning, and people have also suggested it in my Discord or said they wanted my opinion on it. I haven't watched the video yet, but I've seen bits and pieces of the discussion, and I think it is interesting. The video I'm referring to is by APS Amplifier, who they often, or Paul specifically, often brings up interesting points about Yu-Gi-Oh! So it's called The Loss of the Mid-Core Yu-Gi-Oh! Player, which, just from the name, I already have an idea of what we're talking about. But the discussion on Twitter also took a little bit of a different turn as well. So let's just go right in without any speculation and see exactly what we're talking about. And you guys let me know about the volume, whether it's good or not.
Hey guys, Paul here. So today I wanted to talk about the
loud.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Phenomenon that I've been observing a lot more in the last couple of years. It's something that I also alluded to on Twitter, but I felt like bringing it to a full discussion.
APS drama again? Okay, is this sort of like a meme? Is
TBPS does not make drama videos. They just, like he said, he brings up good, interesting conversations. All right, it's that simple.
This is sort of meme that's going on. I feel like Paul never really stirs up drama. I feel like Paul always just brings up Paul's way of doing it always feels very valid criticism-esque. Which he does make regularly, but I don't feel like it's drama. It's more like, I feel like it's more in the vein of constructive criticism.
Yes, he does regularly constructively give feedback.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Player. And what I mean by that is this. So competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now actually feels like it has kind of hit a bit of a fever pitch. Like people seem to be really enjoying, grinding the competitive YCS scene more now than ever. I see a lot of videos that are, kind of these niche nitty-gritty, getting into the highly incredible specifics of like combo lines, where to use hand traps, things like that. And people seem to be enjoying the Malice and Rizio format. And for the players that, travel to these YCS events, play test rigorously, they can afford the best cards, and that's not really an issue for them. They seem to be really enjoying competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. And
that's true, I think. I think it's very hard to argue against the fact that competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! is doing well right now. Competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! is doing well. Numbers are great. And the format also, I'm enjoying it. I do see myself as a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Player, and I am very much enjoying.
Numbers are great. I don't know about that. Taking a look at the data from the the monthly earnings and sales, and for example, the OCG. During the release of the highest grossing product, actually, I don't think it was OCG. This is looking at the TCG player sales. Crossover Breakers was released in December. One Piece was outselling Yu-Gi-Oh! Which is very concerning because it was during a month where Yu-Gi-Oh!'s biggest product of the year was being sold, which is Crossover Breakers. One Piece is selling more than Yu-Gi-Oh! According to TCG Player. We don't obviously have a wider number of data there and the numbers, but if we're talking about numbers, line go up. As far as I am aware, One Piece is kind of doing pretty well. So, in terms of event attendances and stuff, it's all very contextual. EU YCS's numbers are great. America feels kind of down. Regional numbers don't look as high as they used to be. And from what I understand, local numbers, and locals is a strange one, but scattered around, the European scene, locals are kind of hit or miss. So numbers, I don't know if it's definitely not good. It's probably fine, somewhat stagnant, but I don't think Yu-Gi-Oh's numbers are good right now. But that requires a little bit more data there. But I know for a fact One Piece was outselling TCG Player on the TCG side, and in OCG they had their numbers posted on the Reddit. You can probably find that somewhere. One Piece and even Duel Monsters is beating Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! Usually holds that number 2 spot in Japan, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Was falling to like third or fourth place compared to the usual. Pokemon's always number 1 in Japan, never ever gets dethroned. But that number 2 spot used to be Yu-Gi-Oh! 100%, but now Yu-Gi-Oh's kind of being a little bit dethroned by One Piece and Duel Monsters over there. That's where the numbers are.
Enjoying Ryzeal and Malice format, and those are the kind of things that I feel like it's easy to forget, though, that is not the entirety of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community, of course. Like, the 2,000 people, the 3,000 people that decide to travel to a YCS event is not, you're not getting the full picture, right, of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community that way. But, I mean, you do get a fair share, the competitive players. And I suppose that maybe that's what we're getting to here, is that, like, that part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is doing great, but maybe he's worried about other parts of the game.
This is good. I want to be clear that I think that this is a good thing. They're having fun with competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's great. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. On the other end, you've also got a lot of people who recently have been embracing older formats. Things like GOAT and Edison format come to mind. Some people also like to play Toss or, Hat format as well. But basically these older snapshot formats. And you see it a lot, especially in content creation now. A lot more people are doing, some sort of a spin the wheel.
Just as a side note for Time Wizard, I think Edison does extremely well in NA more than EU. From what I heard at the last event, the NA Edison events always cap out, and I think they hit like 500 plus players. So there is a big demand for Legacy Yu-Gi-Oh! Hopefully something they explore in the future, but they get very good numbers for Edison specifically.
Wheeled GOAT, Wheeled Edison, it's kind of expanded to include things like cubes and draft as well. And again, that's really cool. Getting to sort of take a dive back into these nostalgic old Yu-Gi-Oh! Times is great. There tends to be a lot of sort of popular viewership among casual and nostalgic fans there. So if you're a content creator, that's great. We did our Retro Rival series with the Retro Pack, and that was a lot of fun. And you see a lot of content from that end of the spectrum as well. But what it feels like there isn't a lot of is a lot of interest and sort of almost maybe support for the mid-core Yu-Gi-Oh! Player, I call it. What is the mid-core Yu-Gi-Oh! Player exactly? Well, basically, this is this player who, they've played Yu-Gi-Oh! For a really long time. They play at locals most weeks. They've been in a few regionals. And
I used to be a mid-core player.
They win with their favorites. They get enthusiastic or excited about anime decks or just some of their favorite decks getting new support. And even if their favorite deck isn't like super duper YCS level viable, they still want to do the best they can with it. And they want to find content about that. They want to find places to play those decks. And what I'm basically finding is happening is that these players have been sort of neglected a little bit and are now.
So this is the middle of the pack Yu-Gi-Oh! Player, which I think is where, I feel like there's like kind of like, depending on where you want to throw the scale, there's like the bottom, 20% of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community or the top 20% of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community, and there's like the middle, 60% of the community. Like the top 20% are like the people who play like multiple times a week. They own all of the top tier decks, the staples. They travel to events, to almost every single event. And then you have the bottom 20% in terms of the competitive scale, who are the people who maybe like collect packs. They just do like they buy a couple of boxes once in a while, and they're just like collecting like the fun stuff aspect of the game. And then the middle portion, again, these numbers are completely made up. I'm just kind of throwing like an estimate out there. This is where like the middle of the pack Yu-Gi-Oh! Player is, which is the where I used to be personally, which is like you play the competitive decks, you play a little bit of pet decks as well, rogue decks, but you optimize it, you want to compete, you want to try and see how well you do with your favorite decks, with your rogue decks, and occasionally you'll pick up like the meta deck, but you may not necessarily travel to every single event, you may not go to locals multiple times a week, or even maybe only once every 2 weeks. That's sort of where like the middle of the pack player is. And I feel like a lot of that is kind of rough right now, because of the pace of the game, but I think this is definitely something they'll bring up in the future. But I think that's rough. That's kind of sort of what we're talking about when we say mid-core.
Migrating to other card games or just quitting Yu-Gi-Oh! In some cases.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the argument because, I mean, yeah, that's definitely a thing that exists, right? Like there is, so basically what we're talking about is there's people that enjoy grinding Yu-Gi-Oh! At a high competitive level, which are the people that have like, they don't have an issue with, or are fortunate enough to be able to afford the expensive cards, and so they are taking part in like a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Space, and they're not trying to play a deck because they just like it, they're trying to play a deck because they're trying to win, they're trying to travel to big tournaments, and so on and so forth. Which is a very, that's something that is enjoyable for them to do, and they are enjoying it, and there's enough of them so that we still have a lot of very big tournaments out there. So that kind of space is fine. And then we've also got what I think we refer to it as like a more casual environment for Yu-Gi-Oh! To play in, where you don't really care what the current like meta decks are or how expensive Moltrami Fubolas is or whatever, right? You're just like trying to have fun by playing like your favorite Time Wizard format, or you're watching content creators do like draft and all that kind of stuff, which I also agree with. There's a lot of fun to be had in Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of just the competitive space, which is something that I've been dealing with that as well in terms of content creation, because I don't only enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh! In the competitive sense, I also enjoy a lot of these other things, which is it's been difficult for me to explore different directions in content creation, because it feels like you're always you're building up a community or a viewership for one thing. It feels hard to switch sometimes. Like for example,
Josh claiming to enjoy fun.
I thought was really fun, and I had a blast.
Liar.
But that stream did have a couple hundred viewers less than what I usually have, which is understandable because normally people come here to watch like competitive Master Duel or whatever, right? which is fine. But that space definitely exists, right? And there's a lot of fun to be had with Yu-Gi-Oh in different ways. What I'm not getting just yet is what the mid-core, like who exactly is mid-core and why are they having a problem? Like, is the argument that it's like, because I'm sure there's always been people like this, right? There's always been people who have like pet decks or favorite archetypes and they're trying to make them work. And they don't want to or don't have the finances to afford like a new meta deck every other month or every other set, which is completely fair enough. Those are, we're losing those right now, I guess, is the argument. I do think there's a point to be made. I mean,
for context, Paul did make a post on Twitter sort of prefacing this or elaborating. I can't remember which order the tweet and the video came out in, but basically he was invited officially actually by Bandai to take part in the there was like a One Piece event or like Bandai Card Fest. So they had a bunch of One Piece stuff. They had Gundam TCG as well, which they were revealing. And he was talking about how he spoke to a lot of ex-Yu-Gi-Oh players there. And a lot of those ex-Yu-Gi-Oh players are exactly that middle of the pack player base that we're talking about, which is all of the people who play the game semi-competitively. It's people who occasionally will pick up the best deck or fully try and optimize their favorite pet decks. And the people who can't travel to every single event, but do go to locals every week, every couple of weeks, local regionals within their area, and maybe a YCS a couple times a year, potentially Nats as well. There's like the sort of middle of the pack player that perhaps ventures outside of their district and region. That's sort of the middle of the pack player. And Paul was talking about how so many of these types of players migrated over to One Piece. Number one reason they stated was cost of the game. And number two reason was the pace of the game. The Yu-Gi-Oh was just getting way out of hand with its combos, with its speed, with its knowledge that you require just to play a basic deck at a simple level. They just migrated over to One Piece because One Piece gameplay loop is sort of in the middle park of where Yu-Gi-Oh was, which is like kind of like the Edison format. You know, there's like a couple of combos you can do here and there, but for the most part, you are sort of, you know, playing at a somewhat slower pace. And that's sort of the game that they preferred and recognized. So that's the context for what Paul is giving as the mid-core player for anyone who did want more elaborated there.
I mean, I could see it happening. I don't have the numbers behind it, but I do think for those, I thought that there was going to be, or that there is going to be more of a emphasis on the financial aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh. That's what I thought when I read the title, and I'm going to continue watching in a second. I just want to before I forget what I was going to say. I think there's an argument to be made that like if you were very casual about Yu-Gi-Oh, you don't really have an issue with Yu-Gi-Oh being expensive, right? Because like if you're just trying to play your favorite retro format, or you're trying to draft with friends or whatever, right? You don't have to care how expensive a meta deck is and how expensive it is to keep up with the game. On the other hand, if you were super deep into Yu-Gi-Oh, like you're a hardcore.
So the problem here is like casual can sort of mean two things, right? I feel like personally, there's like casual and there's casual competitive, right? There's casual competitive, which is sort of what I've just described, that whole middle core player. But there's also casual where it's like they are just sort of completely out of the bubble of the competitive sphere. Like they open packs, they buy like cool looking fancy rarity 13,000th edition of Blue Eyes for their binder. And they'll draft like some funny packs with their friends once in a while. But then there's like casual competitive, which I think like needs to be sort of emphasized a little bit more. It's that middle core Yu-Gi-Oh player. It is that person who has a pet deck that they play, you know, hand traps in, disruptive cards. They understand the flow of the modern Yu-Gi-Oh game compared to a casual, which is just like, here's a Yu-Gi character deck that I'll fuck around with. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference between that casual and that other kind of casual.
Hardcore Yu-Gi-Oh player, hardcore competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player, you're like so invested into the game that you probably also don't have an issue with investing, because I mean most hobbies cost money.
Because like in the context of this Yu-Gi Boomer like collector's, you know, character deck type of person, the concept of a hand trap is just like, you know, oh, that's like a competitive card. You know what I mean? But there is that sort of middle core casual player, semi-competitive casual player that exists, I think.
You're super deep into Yu-Gi-Oh, you're just going to pick up like a new deck for the next thing, and that's that. It feels kind of natural. Like it doesn't always feel great, at least from my perspective, to pick up more Charmies for the next format or something like that, because it is a lot of money. But if someone is as invested into the game as I am, for example, it feels like that's just a natural thing to do. I don't question it every single time a new staple card comes out. I'm not going back to like, oh, should I really pick this up or not? I'm like, yes, I see myself as a hardcore competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player, so yes, I'm going to pick up like the new stuff. That's just how it is. I could see for some people who are like right in the middle, like they care about Yu-Gi-Oh, they would like to compete, but they're not quite hardcore enough to where they don't question the amount of money a card costs. You know what I mean? I could see that being an issue, and those kind of people would then naturally maybe look at other card games because they're not so invested into Yu-Gi-Oh that it feels like impossible for them to switch. So like they see like, hey, at this other card game, I could get a more competitive deck for like maybe the same or less money, right?
So this
in other card games, you can buy another competitor, like in Pokemon, you can buy a deck for the cost of one Mulch Army or like one Engraver in other card games, right? Just so we really set the scene for what cost is in Yu-Gi-Oh! And what cost is in other card games. Like the average Pokemon deck is one Engraver. In Yu-Gi-Oh! 2, this is a topic that's going to be brought up throughout this, so we'll talk about that as we get there.
This past weekend, we went to Bandai Card Games Fest. It's basically the nationals that they have for all the different Bandai games. That's One Piece, Union Arena, Digimon, Battle Spirits, and I feel like I'm forgetting something else. Dragon Ball and Super Fusion World. And so basically, like a lot of people that we met there were really big fans, and that was cool. And they would oftentimes tell us.
I mean, this is the biggest issue with Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Like, I'm not trying to fact check this or anything, but this right here, costs will be brought up, so I don't want to spend too much time in it because they will talk about cost. But I just sold 3 Primite Lordly Load, and I bought 3 Alestrals decks and 2 Digimon decks. Right? Like, a Yu-Gi-Oh! Playset got him 5 decks in other games. That's absurd. That's where Yu-Gi-Oh! Is cost-wise. And the biggest, number one reason I don't play Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG is cost. That's it. It's cost. I don't play the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG because it's too expensive. I don't feel cards are worth that amount of money. And that's like the simple bottom line for me personally. I like it. I think it's interesting to watch. I like watching YCSs. The gameplay currently looks fun and interesting, but I'm not spending £600 plus to take part in it.
Us, hey, I'm a really big fan of you guys.
And we can talk about how, you can just pick up Ritual Beast for like $50. We'll get into that.
Like play Yu-Gi-Oh! Anymore, but I still watch your content. And that's a nice compliment to hear, but it is a little bit worrying because it means that these are players who, in some way or another, got burned from Yu-Gi-Oh! Or just disinterested, and they migrated to a card game that they maybe feel better suits their needs. So, what are these needs exactly?
I do get that too, by the way. I don't know exactly how often, but I've definitely had comments of people saying like, oh, I don't even play Yu-Gi-Oh! But I just enjoy watching your content or hanging out in your streams, which I do appreciate that. I do think it's a nice thing to say. But sometimes I do wonder like why that's the case. Like I'm thinking like, hey, why are people watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Content but not actively playing?
Well, I go to a lot of conventions as it happens, and
because
I go to them almost, I think, like more than I go to YCS events now. I go to, your New York Comic Cons, your Anime Expos, DreamCon, stuff like that. I like meeting fans and just other like card game players at these events and talking to them and getting to know their real lived experiences with Yu-Gi-Oh! Or whatever else. Like, why did they quit Yu-Gi-Oh?
Because
why
it
do
sucks.
They enjoy my content sometimes, but still like they don't really enjoy playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And some of the reasons that I oftentimes hear are things like getting priced out of the game, the power curve of the game, just kind of leaving their favorite decks behind. Maybe they quit because of pendulums or link monsters, or it's just something to do with Konami, right? There's a bunch of different things people say about that. And I think that all those reasons are really valid to varying degrees. Like this is gonna, of course, from person to person, people quit at different times for different reasons. I'm not saying it always falls into one of those 4 categories. There could be other reasons why somebody might quit. But I think that what Yu-Gi-Oh! Seems to kind of have really lost at the end of the day, it's just, in my opinion, you can weigh in, is it's just lost the middle ground. It feels like there's no longer space for the player who just wants to play. Here's an example.
This is like somewhat political, but there's always like a loud minority on 2 ends of the spectrum on any one issue and argument. There's always like the people who are really loud about how much they hate a thing, and there's also people who are really loud about how much they love a thing. But the one thing you need to be so careful of whenever you're running a business or anything like that is that middle ground, who are usually silent, who usually don't make any comments or give the feedback. They just sort of exist and they just play there. Do you know what I mean? It's the people who, for example, reviews, for example, right? You only really see like the extremes in reviews, right? The people who really enjoyed something, the people who really hated something. You don't really see that often people who are just in the middle and the neutral, right? And that's the majority of people who are in the audience of a business, of a game or anything, right? And it's hard to get that understanding of where that player is and what their current thoughts and feelings are. Because there is a lot of loud voices in Yu-Gi-Oh! But it's important to try and understand, okay, so how representative are these people? Because there's really loud voices about how much people hate Ash Blossom as a random example, right? There's a lot of loud voices about that. But you have to ask that question, how representative is that loud voice from this tiny minority of branded players as an example, right? Is Ash Blossom actually a problem? Or is it just a really loud minority? So this middle group, this majority bulk of the player base has to be analyzed and dissected, and it's really hard to do that.
Example I've been giving, Six Samurai. They recently got support in Rage of the Abyss, and it was some pretty cool support cards, right? A couple new synchros and like other things like that. And they're even going to be getting more support cards in the next couple sets. But the thing is, Six Samurai don't fit into either of the camps that I described earlier. So basically, Six Sam aren't really going to be beating Malice and Ryziel. I know that you can optimistically speak and say like, oh, well, maybe the perfect Six Samurai player can do it. Sure, cool. But I think that for the average player, it's kind of accepted and known that like Six Sams aren't going to be winning the next YCS. Also, though, Six Sams can't be played in Edison format, right? These new Six Samurai cards. So if you're sort of this mid-core player and you're excited about the new support for Six Samurai, or maybe recently Midolce or something like that, what do you do, right? Like, I feel
This is such a good and interesting point. And I was thinking about elaborating on this further in a video, but basically, there's a lot of legacy support. There's a lot of, middle tier type of decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! That become somewhat relevant into the competitive space. Like the new Six Samurai support makes it a decent rogue deck. Question, where do you play that deck? Where does that deck slot in to Yu-Gi-Oh? One of the biggest problems with current Yu-Gi-Oh is that there is modern advanced constructed format. There is one format, there's one way to play it, and only one way to play the game. It's not going to stand up and consistently take on Ryziel or Malice. So so what do you do? People will say locals. I don't know about you, but my locals, people play meta decks. People are playing good decks. They're not top tier YCS topping players, but a slightly above average, Ryziel player will completely dumpster stomp a Six Samurai player. So, yeah, you can play these decks at locals, but there comes a point where it's like, okay, I'm going 1-4 every week or something. How much fun am I really having? So where do these decks slot in, and where do they have a chance to thrive? I think that's a question that needs to be talked about and answered.
So, this, I don't think he's wrong, in the sense that, like, yes, that is true. If you're a big fan of Six Samurai, and you're getting the Six Samurai support from the recent packs, it turned out that it didn't
Why is
really
everyone playing
get
Malice
the
at our
deck to
local?
super hardcore competitive meta viability. I'm like the question I have, I suppose, is has that ever been different? Like, I feel like there's always been this sort of thing, which is very natural with card games.
I think it hasn't always been this way. There's always the existence of a meta game. I think, and I don't know, this could just be like bias. It could be rose-tinted goggles. I could be wrong with the nostalgia. But for me personally, it feels like the gap between best deck and tier 3 decent rogue deck has chasmically increased. It felt like in some previous formats, you could beat like the best deck with some good, decent rogue options. 2019, I think, is a great example of that. 2019 had like 3 best decks, but you could beat Salamangreat in 2019 with Infernoid. You could beat Orcust with Pendulum, right? These more niche choices. The gap between the best decks and the okay decks in this day and age in 2025 feels chasmic. It feels monstrously huge. So yes, while it technically has always been the case that we've had best decks, that gap, to me personally, I could be wrong, feels like it has widened massively.
Where you are simply not able to have every single deck release at a similar power level. Like, you will always have decks from a meta perspective that'll be better than other things, right? And it is simply not possible,
absolutely,
or not realistic for everyone to be happy in the same way. Like, you're going to have people in every single camp. For every single archetype, you're going to find someone who loves that archetype. And you simply can't really satisfy everyone with just like every one of those decks being meta. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the problem is we don't have enough ways to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Because if it's only, hey, you either play Time Wizard or you play Modern, like current format, that's not enough formats to put all of these new archetypes into, and you can't really give support to Six Samurais. The argument I have for that is like, I think we're underestimating the ability to play Six Samurais at locals. I'm sure you could like do okay or well at locals with it. But if what you're trying to do is, I want my Six Samurai support to be able to go to a YCS with and actually win the tournament, then yeah, I guess that's not the case. But that is...
I mean, there's a gap, but there's a stepping stone between I want my Six Sam deck to be able to win a YCS to I would like to think that if I play out of my mind and build my deck correctly, I could take Six Sam to day 2 and potentially top. Right? I think there's like a bit of a gap. There's like a middle ground there that I think exists. You know?
It's just not something you can satisfy with for every single archetype, right? That's always been the case. That like some people, I mean, I'm waiting for Paleo support and for Paleo to be meta viable forever, right? But like, it just turns out that if I want to play Paleo, either I have to go back and play a retro format, or I have to accept that I'm just going to be playing more casually at locals or on Master Duel, or I'm going to have to find other people who are willing to play. I mean, you can sit down with friends and just be like, yeah, we're just going to play without like Ryziel or something. You can play with friends and just everyone plays rogue decks. That's not impossible. But
That's the thing, right? It's like you can play all of these fun decks if you make like these custom ban lists essentially with your friends. Like, oh, let's play, but no Raizio, no Malice. It's like, okay, cool. Maybe these cool new 6-ham cards are playable. Maybe we can compete. But I think Yu-Gi-Oh needs a format for that. I don't know how you create it. I don't know how it exists. I don't know how you make it, and it's a big design thing. But I feel like one of the positive things about Magic the Gathering is that they have like lots of different formats that they can play. How do you bring it into Yu-Gi-Oh? I don't know. Now, obviously, a lot of Magic players might disagree and say, actually, Magic having so many formats is actually bad for the game. But I would just like Yu-Gi-Oh to have a solution to having more than just advanced current competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. It feels like there needs to be just one other competitive format for this game. Just one. Not 7 like Magic, but like 2 good Yu-Gi-Oh formats would be interesting. Some sort of Heart of the Underdog thing, yeah. Heart of the Underdog is technically official. OTS stores are allowed to run their own ban lists. But man, maybe if there was like some sort of unified Heart of the Underdog ban list that Konami could maybe put like community members in charge of, and then we could like rotate it consistently, you know, and then maybe that would be a cool thing. Maybe that would be a big thing. I don't know what the solution is. I'm just throwing out and spitballing ideas here.
But there's no official tournament thingy that supports this, I guess.
Feels like less and less content is being made around these decks. Like you don't really see as many deck profiles. There's not really as much enthusiasm for these cards when they come out. A lot of times when people are buying Raise the Abyss, they're looking for the most expensive cards, right? They're looking to pull a Dominance Impulse,
Maybe
or
rotation.
Flawless, you know, the expensive secret rare. And like I think back and I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh's kind of always been this way to some degree. Like there's always been an expensive $100 secret rare card. So then I think, okay, what's changed now? What's different? And I think what it is
I think what's different now is that there are very good, very serious alternatives. Previously, like in 10 years ago, if you didn't want to play Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like what else would you play? The other expensive card game, Magic, or you would play the baby card game, Pokemon. Now you've got One Piece. Now you've got Digimon, Star Wars. There are other options depending on where you live and how popular some of these other games are. There's like the serious competitor of One Piece is Lorcana as well. Yeah, like there are very serious competitors now.
I don't know if this has been different. I don't remember anyone messing around with the archetypes that weren't considered very good back in the day. Like I'm thinking like, hey, even as early as, I don't know, 2011, 2012, 2013, like no one was messing around with some, I don't know, Battling Boxers or Heroic Challenge or whatever they're called. I'm probably not even remembering them in the right time frame because there wasn't much hype surrounding those archetypes either.
Don't forget as well, like 10 years ago, like social media wasn't as much of a boom. We didn't have like every single archetype having its own Discord server, its own dedicated community with mods and admins and management of spreadsheet combos and resource lists of deck lists that you could access at any one time from those Discords. Like the average ability to play a rogue deck today is you just walk into a Discord, you have a deck list thrown at you, combos, tech cards, everything given to you. Back like 10 years ago, how would you deck build for like, Crystron in 2018 or 17? How would you do that? Like, there wasn't a lot of big crazy resources available. Maybe you'd post on Reddit about it or something, and you get a couple of drummed up interest from people who would read. But that's the difference, I think, today.
Of course, some people did, but those people still exist. There's still people out there. Like, if you go ahead and you want to go into Six Samurai, you can probably go to YouTube and go Yu-Gi-Oh! Six Samurai deck profile. You will find people who tried, right? Yu-Gi-Oh! Six Samurai deck. Okay, that doesn't count. That does not count. You got people looking into Six Samurai.
That doesn't count.
For the new format, right? Postal Alliance Inside. Like that. The new Six Samurai Kizan was announced.
Why is there a Squid Game? Oh my god, Yada.
Yesterday, and there's already replays for this new combo. Like people are doing that. It's not like no one is doing that, and I feel like it's at a level. I don't feel like that level of commitment that people have to those sort of underdog rogue decks that are getting support where we know it's not going to be tier 1. I don't feel like that's been less than usual.
This sort of weird late-stage Yu-Gi-Oh! I almost want to call it. That was actually a video I wanted to make as well, which is like, people aren't really opening packs to just get cards and trade them. They're opening packs specifically to get the cards they need. There's a lot more, information and knowledge out there. So like decks are optimized out the gate. Oftentimes we kind of know what the best stuff is going to be. Yes. And also there's less trading because people are not as interested in buying sealed product and opening it and then like maybe trading some of the ultra rare Mermail or Six Samurai cards or Shark cards that they pulled in Raise the Abyss. They just want to get their...
There is less trading. I haven't really thought about it too much, but my personal interpretation of why people trade less these days is simply because the infrastructure for getting your cards online is just so much better these days than it used to be back in the day. Like, yeah, when I grew up.
Do you know that I don't know if this is crazy, but I feel like it is definitely 100% a phenomenon where trading isn't really a thing anymore. I don't know about you guys, but I haven't traded for cards in a long time. Do you know what the difference is? I feel like the difference is that people know what the chase cards are nowadays. People are only looking for high-end staples or high-rarity cards or the meta current viable cards. What do you have to offer if you trade for that stuff? Not a lot. Because you're not going to trade Ryzeo cards for Ryzeo cards. You're not going to trade Malice cards for Malice cards. You might swap from one deck to the other. But the problem is, like, there aren't a lot of just... And this is a product issue I think we're getting into now. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of good things to own that you can realistically get rid of. If you're a competitive player and you pull, like, a nice staple card, well, you're not going to trade it away. You're going to keep it because you're a competitive player. Like, why would you trade it away? If you pull, like, a high-end Malice card and you're a Ryzeo player, that makes sense to trade. Sure, that's fair enough. But I think, like, a mixture of product not really giving you valuable things that you can pull is part of the problem. Because 99% of competitive players, I think, are just buying the cards they need. So what is really the necessity required for trading into things, you know? It definitely exists. I'm not saying trading is dead, but trading felt like the only way to get cards 10 years ago. Maybe it's because we were younger. Maybe it's because we didn't have, like, big boy jobs. You know, a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players these days are just millennials, are, you know, older Gen Z, and you have jobs now. You just get the thing you want, right? It's like a modern thing. It's like my wife tells me, like, you know, what do you want for your birthday? I don't want anything. If I want something, I buy it, right? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, maybe it's just an age thing. It could be a societal shift. But I personally feel like trading isn't a thing anymore. Or at least within my bubble, you know?
There wasn't a simple way like Card Market or TCG Player where you could just go and find any card for probably the best price online and just get it shipped to your house incredibly fast. And that's why I would used to be like, hey, I would really like that card, but if I'm not going to be like, I don't know, go on eBay and wait a couple of days for an auction to finish or something like that, I would just go ahead and I would go to locals and look for them, right? That would happen.
eBay
right?
auctions,
I feel like that's a general problem with or a general thing rather. I don't know if it's necessarily.
This is how you know I was a YouTuber, but when I was a kid, my dad helped me bid on an eBay auction for a PlayStation 2 capture card, so I could make Grand Theft Auto San Andreas videos on my PlayStation. So we bid on this capture card so that I could use it to transfer videos recorded on my PlayStation to my PC. And it still sticks in my memory right now, but we lost the auction at the last moment because someone outbid us. And until today, I think about, like, you know, 11-year-old Farfa, and it's still, like, it makes me emotional to think about. This is a random side lore note about old eBay and stuff like that, but man, that's those memories, dude. Those memories, goddamn.
Necessarily a problem in this particular case, but this is just.
But then I became a YouTuber anyway, so I guess we're all good.
More, there's more convenient options than waiting for your next locals to find a specific card.
Koalas get their impulse and they'll buy it if they need to, or if they aren't interested in building those other decks I mentioned, they'll just buy the singles for that online. And so there's sort of less trading going on. And like I said, the content kind of seems to be skewing more towards the hyper-casual, nostalgic end of things. So what do you do when you are just a mid-core Yu-Gi-Oh player interested in these sort of middle-of-the-road decks, and there's nothing there for you?
YouTube content is the best way to look at things. If you just look at, like, the numbers on YouTube, it's like, what videos are doing the best? Which, like, we can't make an excuse anymore and say, like, oh, we don't have a big competitive YouTuber anymore. What videos get, like, the highest amount of views? Like, you're looking at, like, 6-digit views, 100K plus. For what? Things like cube videos, my cube videos, Team Samurai drafting videos. Like, these are the types of content that's doing really well in the Yu-Gi-Oh space. YCS meta breakdown and analyses. How well are these doing? Do you know what I mean? Simo's, like, King of Game series, where there's, like, no dueling. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the shit that's doing good. That's the shit that's doing well, right? I think that says a lot about what the average Yu-Gi-Oh player's demand is.
See, I don't think that's true. I don't agree with that. I don't think there's nothing there for you. There's a lot of...
However, I will say that, you know, context is important. Competitive Yu-Gi-Oh players probably aren't going on YouTube, right? If you're a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player, you are getting your resources from your testing circle. You're not going on YouTube and typing in Joshua Schmidt tier list for the most part, right? Because you're past that point. You know what I mean? you're a little more advanced than that entry level. You know, you can pick up a couple of things here and there from YouTube, but for the most part, the ultra competitive players are not really at a stage where they need information fed to them in a basic YouTube video form. So maybe there are a lot of, competitive Yu-Gi-Oh players. I just don't think they're consuming the most YouTube media content. That is, I think, exclusively reserved for the casual end of things, which makes sense.
A lot of decks, maybe not every single one of them, but there's a lot of these sort of middle ground decks that aren't top tier, but also not bad, that you can find a ton of people online that have been looking into those decks. And like, there's infinite Discord servers as well for all kinds of different decks where people are getting together and trying to lab it out. Because at the end of the day, that's what you have to do, right? Like, 100%, I guarantee you can win locals with 6 samurais. You can. Of course, you're gonna have to put in work for it, and it's an uphill battle because you're playing a rogue deck. But there's nothing like inherently bad about that. There's always been rogue decks in Yu-Gi-Oh, and decks that you would have to work harder.
You could argue that, like, you could say that for a YCS as well. But anyway, yeah, you have to work really hard to win a locals with a rogue deck for sure. Again, it's context of the locals. It's really all that matters. It depends on the locals. There are some locals where if you hand trap someone, it's like frowned upon. That's how casual some locals are in the Yu-Gi-Oh community. I've been there. I've seen them. And there are some locals where you are playing like essentially like a mini YCS. Everyone's on meta. Everyone has the latest and greatest updated optimized deck lists, siding patterns mapped out. Like, and this is just a local. There are locals like that. There are two extremes, So it depends on your locals.
And for some of them, they might even be so bad that it would be almost impossible to win a bigger tournament with it. Because they just turned out not that great. And of course, over time, there's going to be more of those decks because we're releasing more archetypes, and some of them are not going to be good. But at the end of the day, that's trading card games for you, and that is also something you're going to experience in other trading card games. At least in every single other card game that I've played, there are decks that are harder to win with, and there are decks that you're not going to find as many resources online as other. Like, there's a difference, right? Like, for the most popular deck, you're going to find more resources than for rogue decks, but you're still going to find some. And eventually, over time, there's archetypes that used to be good that you can't play anymore because they've fallen out of favor. More powerful cards have been printed. No card game is immune to this, right? There's always things, playstyles, archetypes that get left behind over time because newer decks are printed that are just better than it or whatever, right? Like that happens in every single card game. Of course, you could argue that like something like I'm thinking of like Magic the Gathering right now, where there's a bunch of different formats. Where maybe if you really like a certain playstyle, you have a higher chance of being able to play it in Magic because there's like 8 different formats that you can play in, and you just choose the one where your deck is good in. Maybe I don't know exactly how it works. I'm not an active Magic player. But then again, I also hear from Magic players a lot that sort of thing can also be intimidating to new players when they see like, hey, which format am I even playing in? This tournament that I'm going to, what exactly is legal? What is not legal? What exactly am I doing? What can I play? What can't I play? That has pros and cons, right?
I don't want to say that it's completely hopeless. Like, I feel like there are still YouTubers and stuff who are making, a deck profile for these things or kind of combo.
I don't have really anything to say, but I think I kind of mentioned a little bit about it at the start.
Discredit their work. It's just that it seems like some of the buzz around like lots of archetypes getting supported that I felt a few years ago it felt visceral and tangible. It's not there anymore, and it's really tough to describe. And so that's why I'm kind of putting this discussion out there, because I think that you guys tend to have a good way with words in the comments. Sometimes people can, better just better explain kind of like what it is that I feel like I'm seeing. And I wonder if this is something that other people are seeing after card shots. Because it does lead to the bigger issue maybe, which is that Yu-Gi-Oh is sort of bleeding players to a lot of these Bandai games. They are oftentimes seen as more accessible. They are oftentimes a little bit more affordable. Sometimes they have like better pricing and things like that. But I think that just the general thing is that the mid-core Yu-Gi-Oh player feels more seen and more recognized and maybe more cared for by these Bandai games. And it could also be Magic or Lorcana or something else. I'm not saying it's only those. But then maybe what Yu-Gi-Oh seems to be giving them. So yeah, I want people to weigh in. How do you feel about this? Do you think that this is a problem? Like, what's changing here? What's caused it? I don't want this to be one of these videos where it's like, Yu-Gi-Oh is dying, right? I'm not saying that Yu-Gi-Oh is dying or it's dead, but I think that it's a phenomenon.
Ooh, breaking case of emergency. Yu-Gi-Oh is dying. Bring out that discussion.
They're planning something. I think that there still needs to be like a mid-power level format where somebody can play new support cards for their Sharks or their Six Sams or the Medolce or whatever, because those can't be played in Edison, but like still with a power level.
Like, I think like that is the best discussion, right? Is like, where do you play these like middle core decks? Like this new Medolce support as an example. Incredibly good support cards for the deck. Doesn't fix exactly what the issue with Medolce is, which is needing extenders, but you'll never see that deck top anything. Why? I think the problem is like there just isn't an environment for these type of middle tier decks to thrive. There's always middle tier decks in Yu-Gi-Oh, but Yu-Gi-Oh is so overt in the best decks and what it's trying to throw out at you that you're forced to play these new top tier best decks. But the problem is like the pace of the releasing of the schedule, I think, is something we haven't talked about yet. But the pacing of the release of the schedule of Yu-Gi-Oh cards means that, and the lack of consistent events as well, means that you're going to not see experimentation. If you can only go to like 2 YCSs in a season, you're going to make the most of your time. You're not going to like fuck around and, let's try throw 6 Samurai at this one. Arbitrary number. If you could attend 10 YCSs in a year, you might play a fun deck for 1 or 2 of them. See how you do with it. But if you only have like 2 or 3 major events in a season, you're going to do your absolute hardest, and it means you have to play the top tier best decks. So the environment for the middle tier decks doesn't really exist, and you aren't really rewarded, and you aren't really gaining anything from playing those type of decks. The problem is that APS is bringing generally valid criticism to the game by delving into the below-the-surface problems that many people are not going to take a look at. Looking at hyper-competitive players and seeing how they're hyper-competitive at locals ruins growth for this game, and people take that to just shit on APS and not take their criticisms with actual thoughts. Well, there's a lot you're saying there to dissect, but I don't think hyper-competitive players and their hyper-competitive is a problem, because you're saying it ruins growth. Naturally, people don't like to lose. People don't like to realize that, you know, they misplayed or that their deck just isn't good enough. I think there's a deeper rooted problem there, which is like those players, I feel like, don't have an environment to thrive in. And maybe that's because by nature, you're playing a competitive game. Like, Yu-Gi-Oh's goal is not to show off a crazy fun, like, crazy combo. Maybe in like a YouTube video, sure. But when you attend a locals, like, that's not really inherently what the objective of the game is. The objective of the game is to reduce your opponent's life points to 0, right? So where do you find that middle ground of, hey, I like this deck, I want to play it and enjoy the loops and combos and gameplay that it offers, but if I go to locals, I'm going to get stomped by Ryzeal. I don't get to do that. Art of the Underdog as a solution, potentially?
Or where they're viable enough to deal with, like, you know, the current top tier decks. That's like one of the big things. There's other stuff too. I think the Yu-Gi-Oh! Facility leagues.
That's exactly what I like about Yu-Gi-Oh! That it is possible to compete with my pet deck, and I love...
What will prevent people to try hard in the new Rogue format? Well, you see, if there was a Heart of the Underdog style format, let's say you ban Malice and Ryzeal, you just go to the next best decks, right? Clearly, obviously. But people don't really know what comes after that, right? And then let's say you ban those decks in a Heart of the Dog situation. Well, then what comes after that? You know, not trying to, like, plug too much here, but Last Card Standing, the tournament series that we run, is a great example of that. For as long as LCS has existed, LCS top cuts have been 2 or 3 spots to one deck, and the rest is singletons. Out of 16 top cut spots, every LCS, there's like literally about 10 plus unique decks. People like that. Because, you know, if you were to try and playtest an LCS format every single week, constantly, forever, you would probably find best decks, and you would find like more of a, you know, leaning towards a certain archetype and stuff like that. But when you nerf decks enough, you get such a wide spread that they become really equalized in that sense, and then people's pet decks and stuff get to thrive and do well. And of course, yeah, the objective is different in some ways, but ultimately you are still trying to win games, right?
Of that Konami Prince Legacy support to help my pet deck keep up with the modern game. Yes, it's an uphill battle, but I love it. I have a hard time evaluating this because, I mean, to be clear, I am not representing the entire Yu-Gi-Oh! Community. I can only offer my perspective, and my perspective is the one of a highly competitive player, right? And also as someone who, when I'm saying you could go to locals and win with your pet deck, also I'm implying like, hey, you need to play well with that. And I'm aware that, like, not everyone is maybe in the position to even be able to do that because, like, maybe they'd be able to play their pet deck, but they would be missing.
Also, not everyone is a world champion, Josh, so, you know, that is also important. Like, when you have a recipe of not great deck plus not great player, you will just never stand a chance at locals, right? You're just going to go 0-4 every week if you play Ogdoadic versus Ryzeal. Like, that's just the reality, you know what I mean? So you have to try and balance that somehow. You could just say skill issue, admittedly, true, you know, that it is what it is. It is a competitive game at the end of the day. But ultimately, there is a large portion of this player base that plays less competitive decks. So how do you help them in some regard to stand a chance? I think you do that by lowering the gap between the best decks and the not best decks. And even an alternative format to help them thrive, I think, as well, is the best way to address this.
I don't know, staples or even like the knowledge or the time to keep up with what's been going on in Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is, those are different topics. But I am not entirely sure what we're expecting out of Yu-Gi-Oh! Here, and I also don't know if I agree, or I don't think that that's why people are leaving. I don't think the reason people are leaving is because their pet deck isn't good right now, or like they're yeah. I think some of the other arguments made here are completely valid reasons.
No,
why,
I think that is one of the main reasons.
Player. Let's just call him the mid-core Yu-Gi-Oh! Player because I do think it's a fine term. Like,
a lot of people like, yeah, no, I think that is why a lot of people are leaving.
People that are not casuals, but they're also not hardcore invested. They're kind of just like playing Yu-Gi-Oh! But like they're not super invested into the game. They're just having fun with it right now. But
Play floodgates,
right? they might leave because they feel like another card game is offering
What
them
baffles me is the
a
mental
quote-unquote
block
better
of a
deal on
second
their
format.
experience, right? Maybe they do
It's
think,
'cause
okay,
it's
Yu-Gi-Oh!
so
Is pretty fun, but One
unique
Piece is
and
also
never
pretty
been
fun.
done
How can
before
I
in
decide between the
Yu-Gi-Oh?
two? Well, let's just go buy a One Piece deck is less expensive or something like that. Sure, I'm sure there's people out there where that happens, right? Where they think about it and they're like, yeah, I like both games, but right now I would just rather spend whatever a One Piece deck costs over what a Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck costs because I don't really have a preference over both of these. Like, I think both of them are fun, so I'll just go and play the cheaper one. I'm sure that happens. 100% that happens. With regards to the viability of pet decks and older archetypes or whatever, there were things like yeah, so this discussion carried on over to Twitter where Team Sam posted like, what if this person wants to play a 6 Samurai deck, for instance? They just got new support, but where do you play it exactly? It's outclassed by Malice and Ryziel, and obviously you can't play these new cards in Edison format. How about Generator, Vanquish Soul, Nouvelle, all this sort of stuff? And then Peep said, I'm so happy to see Paul talk on this. Nouvelle, 6 Sams, Battling Boxes, etc. A whole host of unique decks with interesting game plans that'll never see play unless the benevolent card designer gods give busted legacy support. Why print them if there's nowhere to play them? This is not wrong. However,
A good question. Why do these cards exist if there's nowhere to play them? There's no environment to play them, right?
this is something that's, I mean, first of all, it's always been the thing, which also is not a good defense, to be fair. Like, only because something has
Yeah, that's... I'm glad he realized that's not a good argument immediately.
always been the case does not mean it's a good thing. Like, that is not, please don't use that argument too often. But I don't feel
Yu-Gi-Oh's always been expensive. Well, you know.
like this is something that has changed. And the next thing is that this is very natural to card games in the sense that I can tell you the reason why they print them. I can tell you the reason why filler cards are being printed into packs, and this is not unique to Yu-Gi-Oh! This is not something that only Konami does, right? But like common cards that are completely unplayable, and so on and so forth, like pack fillers are being printed to dilute the card pool, right? So you can make the better cards rarer. That's why there's like quote unquote useless cards in there. You're not meant to play every single common card and be able to build a meta relevant deck with it, right? Like in no card game that's the case, right? There's no card game.
Whoa, hold on a second. That's not completely true. That's, you know, and again, like this is another discussion on alternative formats, but that's what drafting is, right? Like, that's why product is really good in other games. Because some people buy boxes of One Piece or Star Wars or Magic specifically because they're going to draft with those cards. Because there are a lot of good cards that you pull in them that are good to just play with. The question isn't why is there pack filler, it's why there is so much of it. Exactly. That's a huge issue, right? It's like the product in Yu-Gi-Oh! Fundamentally is so one-dimensional, is the best way to describe it. If you take away anything I'm saying from this point, is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Product is extremely one-dimensional. There is only one type of thing you're trying to do when you get cards out of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Box. Pull high-rarity chase staple cards that are good in the current advanced format metagame. That's it. There's only one objective to pulling cards out of a box in Yu-Gi-Oh! These days. Some people pull because it's fun and, you know, but ultimately you are just pulling a slot machine with cardboard. But the majority of people, if you pull from your packs, when you open your entry packs at locals, etc., you have one objective and one objective only. It's to pull the good cards that are relevant in the current metagame so that you can sell them for higher value or trade them for something else you want.
Game where every single card in a set
Why is there so
playable.
much and
I'm
why
not
is there
sure
no
if
support
in
to play
Yu-Gi-Oh!
this? Yeah.
Like the ratio of pack filler to actually meta relevant cards is worse or better than in other games, right? But like
It's worse. There's science on this. There's literal mathematical evidence, and I implore you to watch the video on this. Who was the content creator? But they made a breakdown discussing pack filler in card games, and basically Yu-Gi-Oh! Had the highest amount of pack filler. Number one, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Card packs have 9 cards compared to other card games, which I think is 6. So the percent, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Has more cards total in the card pool. So Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG has like 100. Other card games I think have like 80, I think, or like 60 or something. And there's just more packs inside of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Booster than other card games. So percentage-wise, numbers-wise, Yu-Gi-Oh! Technically has the most amount of useless shit in a pack that you can potentially pull, which is bad, right? Because pretty much 90% of your pulls are worthless, right? Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have energy or lands. I mean, yeah, a resource would obviously be a good pull in other games because they're very universal in a lot of ways. Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't really have that other than staples, and staples are kind of fewer and harder to come between compared to lands and energies in other card games. Maybe they just, I don't know, maybe they just need to reprint staples in every set, right? Like even in core sets, just put Ash Blossom in there again. Just put MST in there again. Just put Nibiru in there again. Is that a dumb idea? I just randomly came off the top of the dome with that idea. Is that something we could do? Because at least the pack filler you're pulling is a playable card, right? I don't know. That could be an idea. Ernios.
Or that's just something that, I mean, I can get behind the argument that that's not a great thing to be. But like, worse for sure. Look,
It would be good, so they won't do
like
it.
You have. One argument that I can get behind is that for Yu-Gi-Oh! It's worse because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not draftable. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not meant to be drafted. So maybe a terrible card in Magic the Gathering that doesn't see play in competitive Magic is still fine to exist because people can have fun with it in a draft environment or whatever. Right? Fair enough. Fair point. But that's not really what we're talking about here, right? Like we're not talking about like, hey, we wish Yu-Gi-Oh! Had a draft format, because that wouldn't even work with the 6 Samurai cards either, right? Like it's legacy support. Even if you were to draft with that sort of set, you wouldn't be really playing with those cards. But in general, the one thing that Yu-Gi-Oh!
Maybe not in a draft format, but again, an alternative format like Heart of the Underdog. You could play something like that, right? I guess is the point here.
has the thing is, these cards are from a competitive perspective. If you're a hardcore competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Player, these cards are pack filler, yes. But if you are a 6 Samurai pet decker, they're not pack filler to you, right? You can pick these cards up and you can play at locals with them. And the thing is, something that Farfa said, yeah, you can play Rogue at your locals because the average homegrown meta player isn't at a YCS competitor level, sure. It also doesn't feel great to have to play out of your mind to beat a below average player because you can't afford 3 Engraver. I just really dislike the you can definitely play X deck at your locals argument, because it implies that most locals are filled with dribbling goats who can't tie their shoelaces, when the reality is that there's a lot of genuinely good locals out there that have fostered champions. Which is, look, it's not entirely wrong, but then exactly what are you expecting? Like, what are you expecting the situation to be like?
Glasgow locals are crazy good. Shout out to this chatter, he knows.
Are you expecting to beat someone who has a better deck than you, but you also don't want to play better than them, and you also want the cards to be cheap? So like, what kind of situation what would you want the game to be like? If you were...
He just made like 3 points and then didn't really say why it's impossible. Like, what? Yeah, I want the game to be cheaper, more accessible, more balanced. Like, is that bad? Like, what's wrong with that? Did I say something wrong?
Or if you're a pet decker with, like...
I need to hear that again.
A better deck than you, but you also don't want to play better than them, and you also...
No. I'm not saying you shouldn't play better than them. I'm saying, like, if you want to beat, like, Fiendsmith, you said you want to win but not play better with a worse deck? Okay, not play better. There's a difference between not... Like, yes, the better player should win. But the difference is that if you play a rogue deck, you don't just need to play better. You need to play, like, tip-top perfect out of your mind to even beat someone who is, like, misplaying on a meta deck. Because there's a big gap between the power levels, right? On average, the better player should win. But if both players are average, the person with the better deck is going to win 99 out of 100 times with something like Raizyu versus 6am. Whereas I think that number should be lower. Average play versus average play, rogue deck versus top tier deck, I think it should be more like 70-30. Because right now it feels like 95-5. Do you know what I mean? I think that problem is that gap there.
Want the cards to be cheap. So like, what kind of situation did...
Yeah, I want the cards to be cheap. Josh, what? Is that a bad point? Yes, I want the cards to be cheap.
What do you want the game to be like? If you're a pet decker with, like, isn't, like, a genuine question, but isn't this sort of like part of being the fun of being a pet decker? Isn't the fun like, hey, I'm working hard on this deck, I'm spending time, I'm labbing it out, I'm finding a way to make it work, and it's rewarding because I can now beat meta decks with my pet deck? Because...
Oh yeah, for sure. That is a large portion of the draw to playing a rogue and pet deck, is that, you know, you get to, like, work towards, like, you know, building a deck that actually beats meta competitive decks. I think the problem is that it's too hard now. Like, a lot of rogue decks just can't even stand a chance against modern Yu-Gi-Oh decks over the last few years. Like, you don't even have a chance. Like, the answer is, like, play a billion floodgates or you know, win the coin flip and hope your opponent bricks, basically, right? Like, that's I think the main takeaways. Like, that gap is so wide now that it doesn't really matter how well you play or how well you deck build. You are kind of just getting stomped by even average meta players, right?
If you're just, like, I'm trying to imagine a world where this isn't a problem, right? Where you can just pick up any deck in Yu-Gi-Oh, you go to locals, and you can win with it against better players while playing worse than them, and then we have the...
You're not playing worse. I didn't say that. No one said playing worse. Where's he getting that from?
Reverse argument, then everyone else is complaining because you're playing a deck that's obviously not designed well. If your deck beats better decks than itself, technically, while playing worse, what kind of game is that fostering? What is that? I don't understand. What I think is a fair argument is Yu-Gi-Oh is expensive at a high level, which is 100% true, and that's frustrating. I get that, especially for people who aren't as attached to Yu-Gi-Oh, who aren't hardcore competitive. But this argument about, like, I'm mad that my 6 Samurai deck is not as good as other meta decks, and I have to work hard to win with it, I don't think it makes that much sense. Because that's
I think when you go format to format to format and like, oh my god, Noah's crying. I think when you go format to format to format and your pet deck like doesn't even stand a chance, it can get frustrating. But I think ultimately the issue is that like when your deck like Six Samurai does finally get cool new shiny support and it's actually good support, it still leagues behind other decks. It's just kind of like, well, why is there only one format to play the game, right? Like some sort of alternative Heart of the Underdog style format would be really good because you would see Madolches, Earth Machine, Six Sam, all these different kinds of middle of the pack decks start to thrive and do well. And I think that's like what a lot of people want to see.
That's the case for
Pet decker as well is because you can't afford to just buy every new deck. It's more reasonable to upgrade it slightly over time instead. That's also a good point as well. You know, it's like you buy like the one deck, for example, and then you stick to it for like a year or two.
every single trading card game out there, and there's never going to be...
The problem is that the barrier to entry for that one deck is like $1,000 per year in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now.
Every single deck on this.
Because if I was just having to pick up a core for like, let's say 200 every like 6 months or something, I would probably be well invested. But I'm sorry, I'm not paying 90 a pop for engravers. I just refuse.
Same like level in terms of power level. And
I'm a dad
now,
man.
Huge fan
I
of
got
Six
other
Samurais,
priorities.
it's disappointing. Because, hey, why is the Six Samurai player not getting the same love as the Yubel player? I get it. It sucks. But there's no way around that. There's always going to be someone disappointed. There's, I don't know how many archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh! We can't have 500 different tier 1 decks that are all operating at an equal power level.
That would be bad for one format, for sure. But, again, it's like, I think another format would help that. You know, I don't know if anyone wants to play in a format where there is literally like 100 viable decks. My personal opinion on that is that would be fucking extremely cool and based. Just saying. If there was literally 100 viable decks, I think that would be fucking cool. I'm just saying, that would be cool as fuck. But I understand that's probably not great for most players and the average person. Because ultimately, like, honing your strategy to beat certain decks is sort of, like, important for deck building. But yeah, it is, I think, essentially just down to fostering an environment where other decks can thrive in Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of current advanced constructed format. What are the biggest annoying things you guys see whenever we, like, react to new cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! We read the new card and it's like, oh, well, I mean, it doesn't +1, it doesn't have a negate, it doesn't have protection, it doesn't float, it doesn't give you versatility. Why is that? Why is it when you read, like, a new card that gets printed and it's like, oh, it's a decent 1-for-1 value trade? Why is it we read that and think that it's bad? Because it's not good enough in the current format advanced constructed of Yu-Gi-Oh! Right? Because the game has one format and one way to play the game and only one way to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Right? If it literally isn't like the new tier 0 style of staple or meta defining deck, like, what's the point of that card? You're not going to draft it. You're not going to play it in another format. Why does it exist? Move on.
I don't think that's what we are talking about. So what are we talking about? Because I don't feel like we're really bringing up much of a... In the APS video, it wasn't that much about card prices. Then there was this response. Yu-Gi-Oh! 1000% has an alternative format problem where Konami refuses to make and support an alternative format to the main game using the cards from the main game. On the subject of card design, of cards not being able to be used, I think this is a symptom of Konami over-tuning the decks they want to sell. Most of the meta decks of recent take all or most of the slices of the balanced design pie. Sam's Yubel lists from his YCS win actually has all 6 elements. I think they can still make meta decks, but just not give them everything. So this is a chart that I don't know if they made it or if it's... I haven't seen it before. Hand trap resilience, consistency, power, non-engine resistance, non-engine space, grind game. Example, Salamangreat has 4 out of 6 with non-engine space, grind game, hand trap resilience, consistency, but lacks power and non-engine resistance. Exo Sister, 3 out of 6 with non-engine space, grind game, hand trap resilience, but lack the others. Brigas and Avalon has 4 out...
Does this feel like an archetype archive now? You know, when Rata rates his, the decks at the end of the video?
Out of 6 with hand trap resilience, consistency, power, non-engine resistance. Full power cash had 4 out of 6 power, consistency. This one I might get black for, but the deck had 10 one-card starters and had more available but chose not to play for non-engine room. Grind game lagged. An example of a deck that wasn't okay was Tier, which had 5 out of 6 with the most hand trap resilience, grind game, power, consistency of every format before. It had everything but non-engine space. Ryziel also has 5 out of 6 with consistency, power, non-engine space, grind game, hand trap resilience. Okay, we're walking down...
Oh, wait a second, hold on. Hasn't iWish technically said that Yubel is better than Tier Limit because it had 6 out of 6 compared to Tier's 5 out of 6? Okay, to be fair, that's because like the power level of Tier is maybe a little... Actually, no, I don't think Tier's power level is higher than Yubel. Like, power level wise, I think Yubel probably is stronger than Tier. I just think Tier like is more... Anyway, that's whatever.
On this road of... Okay, fair enough. Card design has gone in a direction... I don't like this system that we're using here, but we'll get into that. The points are still the points they make in text form are still valid.
I guess like the U-Belt end board is more one-dimensional, whereas Tier's end board is a lot more layered. Anyway, that's just a relevant point. Who cares? Let's focus in on what's going on here.
Is the thing. This system of evaluating a deck has
Tier doesn't need
flaws, and I don't think
non-engine.
should really be used because for a start, these things this makes it seem like a deck either has this or it doesn't, which is something that people, when they quickly refer to a deck, they often do this sort of thing. But in reality, this is just not true. Like these things, consistency is not a 1 or 0 switch. There's no like number where you can say like, oh yeah, now this deck's consistent, and then you go one card below, and now it's not consistent anymore. All of these things it's more like a spectrum. Every single one of these things. A deck is not either powerful or not powerful, or a deck is not either has a grind game or doesn't have a grind game. It's more like you got to look into it way more deeper than that. Which is also why, in theory, it would be completely possible to make a deck that has all of these things.
I think he's like nitpicking this point a little bit too much. Like, yeah, obviously it's a spectrum between all of these different aspects. It's like it isn't a binary deck is consistent or inconsistent. But there is sort of like a threshold you pass where you then sort of accept a deck is consistent, right? Or a deck is powerful. So I think like the nitpicking here is we're kind of like fixating a little bit too much on. We need to sort of like look at the broader picture here rather than the semantics of this, because I think this is still like overall like this is actually a decent analysis.
But just not do like a crazy amount. Like they could definitely make a fair deck that just does everything kind of well, but isn't too crazy at anything, and that probably wouldn't be a problem either, right? Like if there's just a deck that's like, I don't know, I'm looking at a deck that maybe is a little bit of everything, which is something like maybe Marincess would fall into that category, right? Where it kind of has a little bit of everything, but not enough of any of these things to be considered a top meta deck. Just as a brief example that I just thought of, I haven't really.
I don't know about that. Marincess, I would say, is extremely consistent and pretty hand trap resilience, other than Nibiru. It's got grind game, but it's very low on power, I'd say. You could probably pin Marincess on this chart somewhere. Not that we need to, so whatever.
Thought about it too much for like the best possible example, but you can definitely find decks that do 4, 5, 6 of these things relatively well.
What does
enough
power
into
even
not
mean?
Just because these things are not just something you have or don't have. There's
I think
levels to
usually
it.
when people discuss power, they're talking about ceiling, right? Like, let's give an extreme example, like an FTK, right? Like Blaze Phoenix FTK. Technically, that's a deck you can pull off today, right? That's like the highest level of power you can have in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is an FTK. But it's not a viable deck. Why? Because it lacks every other aspect. It's not consistent. It doesn't have hand trap resistance. It doesn't have any grind game. It doesn't have any non-engine space. So power is what you're doing with the deck. Like winning on turn 0 is the best thing you can do in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or setting up a board that is so hard to crack. You've got Grave Disruption, you've got Hand Disruption, you've got Lingering effects, you've got Omni Negates, you've got Continuous Prevention effects. Things like that, right? Like that's why Tier Limit had one of the best end boards ever, because you didn't just rely on your monster negate. You had a Solemn Warning, you had a trap negate, you had an Omni negate, you had hand traps, you had Grave Disruption with things like Snow. So it was a very multi-layered deck. There wasn't one card that beat Tier Limit, right? That's what we're talking about when it comes to like power.
And I think it becomes especially apparent in their own examples. In their own examples, I think it's very apparent why this isn't a good thing to evaluate decks by, because on their scale...
Someone's going to say Shifter, someone's going to say Shifter, I know. Anyway.
At that point, I don't even think I have to go much deeper into why it's not a great comparison tool. If your thing of evaluating decks, like overall power level, gives Ryziel the same score as Tier Limit. And this is something where I do think that a lot of these things are stuff that Konami has done in terms of, in order to power creep things. They have created very specific resiliences to certain things, like for example, a very, very important card that you will notice certain decks just have random resilience to for no reason. It's kind of arbitrary, and I do get why that's frustrating. It's something like Nibiru, right? That you will find a lot of meta decks these days are just defined by their ability to play around Nibiru, and some of them just have it. They just have it for no real reason other than, hey, it's just printed on these cards that they're not weak to Nibiru. It's basically a design tool that they use in order to make certain decks good and not make other decks too crazy. Is like, you look at something, I think one of the most obvious examples, even though it is like 2 years old, is Sprite, right? Gigantic Sprite essentially just read, summon me before 5, and you're not going to get Nibiru because your opponent also is locked out of anything that isn't level 2, right? Which is something that otherwise, if Sprite didn't have this, they might have had a much harder time playing around Nibiru. Of course, they still had Sprite Red. They arguably didn't even need that sort of thing on Nibiru because they could have always searched Sprite Red before 5 summons, but they didn't have to, right? They didn't have to do that. They could just summon Gigantic Sprite and like summon Carrion or something, and to be safe from Imperm as well, for example. But that was a thing that Sprites did. Ryziel has that too, because Ryziel has this very specific combo line that if your opponent only has Nibiru, can search the Ryziel cross before 5 summons and set it up. Like we've talked about this in the past, why Ryziel can play around Nibiru and other decks can't do it as well, right? Now, this is certainly something that I can see people being frustrated with, especially if your pet deck is something that just loses to Nibiru.
I mean, I don't really have anything to say about this. This is all true and fair, good points, but yeah.
Right, you would look at this other archetype and be like, hey, why the Sprite gets such an easy answer to Nibiru, but my Salamandrake deck doesn't, or my whatever deck you're playing, whatever your deck you're playing. Maybe you have a weakness to.
It is interesting to know that Salamangreat has had multiple spread out waves of support, and Konami never once decided in their design intention to be like, okay, yes, one of the problems with this deck is its resilience to Nibiru, and they just didn't give that deck an answer to Nibiru. I don't know why. I'm curious. Because it does feel like there was a willing decision to be made. We're going to give this deck a drawback, a flaw. But a lot of decks they design feels like they just don't give it flaws or drawbacks.
To Nibiru, maybe you have a weakness to whatever. The thing about all of this is, once again, that is...
Guys, if you play around Nibiru and Salamangreat, your deck is so much worse.
Game design, where
it becomes like a joke power level. Come on.
They have to make it that way. They have to give... If we are all playing...
Like, what, you just, like, don't
Nibiru,
play Will and stuff like that? Come on.
What are they going to do? Just design a bunch of decks that all suck into those cards? So, like, no one is able to play through hand traps? Or are they just designing every single archetype? Once again, this is just not something that's possible. They just can't make every single deck the same deck, right? Of course, they're not doing a perfect job at power creep. That's not my argument. That is 100% not my argument. Please don't pretend like that's what I'm saying. Certain decks definitely do way too much of these things. And if in a vacuum, I even agree with this idea. I've said it in the past. Like, certain decks, especially in 2024, have been doing way too much of this sort of thing, right? I have been saying throughout 2024, one of the particular problems I have with one-card combos is the fact that these decks that are comboing with one card, if they are too powerful, we have a problem because you shouldn't get this amount of non-engine space paired with this amount of power from one singular card, which is why, in particular, Snake Eyes and Yubel were a problem because they could win the game off of one card. One singular card was enough for them to completely build a board that no deck in the game would really break, but they could still play 18 hand traps or something, right? No one has complained, at least I've never heard someone complain about, like, Marincess, you know, as, like, the deck is a problem for Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it's one-card combos and has non-engine space. Like, that's not the argument, but they do sometimes make decks that are just, like, they have too much of, their package is just too complete, right? Because it was not only, like, hey, Snake Eyes has powerful one-card combos and a bunch.
I mean, we've been over this as a community multiple times and on the podcast. This is all true and good points. But ultimately, I'm hoping we reach, like, an end goal, which is like, okay, what is the solution to all of this, right?
Of non-engine, it's not as simple as that. The deck also had immunity to Nibiru, a bunch of extenders to play through hand traps as well, crazy follow-up and grind game. Like, yes, if you phrase it that way, it did have too many of these things. But using this as a simple 1 or 0 system to evaluate whether a deck is a problem or not doesn't work. Ryzeal, for example, is one of the best examples of a Yu-Gi-Oh deck that is well designed for where we're at with the game, right? Like, we are in a spot where, honestly, if during full power Snake Eye format, if you showed me Ryzeal and told me this is what you're dealing with next year, I would say, like, hey, good job. How did they manage to do that? The fact that we've went from Snake Eye format and Yubel format to Ryzeal format is a crazy achievement in card design. The fact that they've, like, it's like a 180 turnaround because of how different these decks work. The thing is, there is, I guess, I think there is some truth to this, where, like, rogue decks are tough to play in Yu-Gi-Oh! Sure. I'm not sure if that's something that can ever change. Like, there's always going to be rogue decks that are not as good as meta decks. That is just something that happens. It also happens in every single card game. Every single card game has, like, just so I understand better, I'm sure there's people out here.
I'm not going to repeat myself here, but
I've looked into other card games. I've played other card games for sure. But in my perception, every other card game that I've played in the past had rogue decks. And not every card game had a different alternative format where those rogue decks were suddenly super playable, right? Like, I've played Runeterra, I've played Hearthstone, I've dabbled in Pokemon a little bit, I've played a little bit of Magic in my life, and I've played Digimon, I know a little bit about One Piece, and to my understanding, all of these games have rogue decks that probably have their fan bases, but they're probably shit on a competitive level, or not as good, and they don't have alternative formats where you can just go and play those decks and be completely fine.
Format, okay, so again, just to repeat one last time, because I don't want to go in circles with it. But having an alternative format does exist in those other games sometimes, but, you know, that's not necessarily the main thing. I think it's what a lot of people are saying is that the other format things is one of the solutions to offering it in Yu-Gi-Oh! But second of all is also that the gap between rogue decks and meta decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, in my opinion, extremely large. Like, he brought up the issue with all of last year, which is like Snake Eye, Yubel, etc., etc. And it's like these decks have no restrictions or flaws. They have the highest ceiling. They have infinite resistance. They can play a bunch of non-engine. Like, you are just never losing games with Yubel against a tier 3 deck, assuming you play it, like, competently. Like, and what people want is they want to be able to win games with their rogue decks if they open well, if they play well, and maybe if they go first. They want to have, like, that, you know, 20%, 30% win rate versus meta decks if they play well, deck build properly, metagame correctly, side deck, and pattern out these things in an optimized way. People just want like a higher win rate. They understand their decks shouldn't be the best decks. They understand these decks are probably not going to be consistently beating the meta decks. But right now, it just feels like that win rate, even if you play out of your mind, is like 5%. That's the issue. That's the problem. That's what people are upset about, I think. Because Yu-Gi-Oh's power creep and level of the game is so far beyond what it's ever been that beating meta decks today is only doable by like floodgates or your opponent completely breaking somehow. And even in this day and age, let's say you play against like, pre-bandless Snake Eye. How does a rogue deck beat Snake Eye if it bricks? What does that mean? It means the Snake Eye player hasn't opened any engine, which means what? They've only opened non-engine, which is what? Hand traps. Your rogue deck is not beating 5 hand traps. Ever. Right? And then all they need to do is top deck that one bonfire or witch, and then you lose. Do you know what I mean? So that is the problem there, is that rogue players feel like their rogue decks have such a uphill battle that it's not even an uphill battle. It's coughing baby hydrogen bomb. And I feel like historically, again, this I could be wrong, could be nostalgia, could be rose-tinted goggles. It feels like it is so much harder to beat the top decks today than it ever has been ever in Yu-Gi-Oh!
Is that true or not? I don't think the gap in One Piece is as big as Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, One Piece is like 2 years old. Of course we have more archetypes, and some of them have fallen further behind. Naturally, of course, the gap between Yu-Gi-Oh's worst deck and Yu-Gi-Oh's best deck is massive, because our game's been around for 25 years without rotation. Like, yeah, I don't think rogue decks itself are the issue.
But that's a problem, right? Like he hasn't addressed this, right? Is like, yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! is an older game. It's been around for that long. We don't have rotation, but we are starting to feel the cracks in that, right? I think that's an issue, is like, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have rotation, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have like a real way to manage its power level, we are starting to see what those issues are. Then they are really reaching like a bursting point, and they have reached the point of no return for so many players. Best example being Team APS mentioning all of the ex-Yu-Gi-Oh! Players that he's talked to, You're getting that number out of nowhere, though. How do you know it's 2015? I mean, I don't have statistical evidence for you, of course. That this is just from my observation, from my watching duels and watching games and taking a look at YCSs. Like that's where I'm getting that from. Again, like I said, I could be completely wrong. Maybe I am just completely making this up. But based on my experience and what I've seen in the community and observing, it feels like rogue decks are chasmically behind the top tier decks. That's what I meant by that.
Meta-defining cards and support for old decks with such a difference in power level. So what you're saying, I mean, okay, I think at this point, we're entering a different debate, and that's just like the quality of legacy support. To which I say, I am happy that we have legacy support in Yu-Gi-Oh!, but you do have to realize that making legacy support is an incredibly hard task in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh!, because these cards are from, in some cases, 10 or 15 or even longer. Like, these cards are old, all right? These cards are old. These cards were all designed for different times of the game. Making support for example, Six Samurai, that makes the deck what you're asking, and basically what you're asking is, hey, if you're making legacy support, do it properly, right? Make it so it's tier 1, but not too crazy, please. Please not another Yubel, all right? Like, don't make him too powerful, but please make me able to... I want to be able to go to locals. I want to be able to win my locals, maybe even like top regionals or win regionals with it. Like, it's got to be good. It can't be too good though, but it also can't be slightly too bad, because if it's slightly too bad, it's just like tier 3 or tier 2 or 3, and then I'm gonna have to work too hard.
I mean, he's acting like this is an impossible job. Josh, this is people's paid salaries and jobs to do this. Like, that's what people go to university and get degrees to study how to game design and fix these problems that he's addressing. Like, it does sound hard, admittedly. That's why I'm not a game designer. But, like, that's what people are there to do, is to make these perfectly niche balanced decks where it's like, we want it to be good, but not too good, but not too oppressive, and it shouldn't have one-card combos. It's like, when you're a card designer and they've been in the business for that long, yeah, they're the experts. And we're hoping that they can pull it off. And we know that they've pulled it off. They have pulled it off. You know what I mean? There have been plenty of good examples of legacy support in Yu-Gi-Oh! And there's been also plenty of examples of bad legacy support in Yu-Gi-Oh! So...
too hard with it. All right? Like, I don't want to work too hard with it, but it also just can't be too easy, because if it's too good, then I don't want that. It just needs to be perfectly right. And now do that with every single legacy support you do, because if you like... And that's rough. That is rough, because...
It's hard, don't get me wrong, but it's possible.
if you look at Six Samurai, all right, Six Samurai specifically is a very good example of this because Six Samurai has some fucked up cards from back in the day. Because back when they made Six Samurai cards, things like hard ones per turn or whatever, or even soft ones per turn, those were not a thing, right? Like you can use Gateway of the Six Samurai infinite amount of times. You can special summon Legendary Six Samurai Kizan infinite amount of times. You can loop that shit to infinity. Why do you think Six Samurai has so many infinite loops and FTKs? It's because those cards are from 15 years ago or even older in like the Grandmaster of the Six Samurai and sort of like that, like 20 years almost, right? Making these cards work in modern Yu-Gi-Oh without completely breaking them is difficult. That is not easy. And
Just give it some restrictions. Oh, you can only summon 6 Samurais from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, etc., etc. I'm sure they've put clauses like these on cards before that have balanced things like that. Yu-Gi-Oh! Players themselves have identified so many issues that could have been fixed with like one restriction, one clause. Promethean Princess, why is it generic? Why does it not need a fire monster? You know, as an example, Halka Fibrax, why did it not need a Crystron? Isolde, why did it not need a Noble Knight, etc., etc., right? Like, it is simple, basic stuff like that. By the way, in the answer to that, why didn't they blah, blah, blah do all of this stuff is because, well, because they essentially, they designed it to be that way. They wanted it to be broken, right? That's a deliberate thing. It's not, they're not stupid. They did that deliberately. You know what I mean? So yeah.
I think for Six Samurai specifically, they just wanted to stay a little bit on the safer side. Like they wanted to give people something that
Drytron new to locks the machine, making it fair. Yeah, like that's an example, right? I don't think Drytron is a healthy deck, but that's an example of restrictions you can put on cards that balance them.
If they made Six Samurai tier 1, and people are out there looping Kizan and looping Gateway of the Six Samurai, do you think that would make more people happy? Do you think that would be a win overall for Yu-Gi-Oh! If that's what people were doing, right? If every single legacy support turned that deck into some sort of Yubel deck? Because that shit's hard, all right? That shit's hard.
There's also like the ability to retrain cards, right? I think this is something that isn't done enough, but I think Naturia was a great example of that. You know, you got to play with these Naturia cards. Like, admittedly, yeah, you're not like fucking cherry locking anymore or normal summoning Bamboo Shoot, but I think that the Naturia support that we got was actually low key, pretty good. It was a nice hitting of the mark. It wasn't a crazy wombo combo deck. It was a nice mid-rangey control deck. You could go first, you could go second. And Josh took it to fucking Worlds, right? I would call Naturia support a resounding success. It's possible. You can make legacy support in the form of retrains. Now, admittedly, what you've done there is you've ignored all of the Naturia support, win condition, archetype, and lore, and you've made these new cards, which kind of really just say Naturia on the name and have it sort of be Naturia in the artwork. There's really nothing Naturia, I would say, I guess, about Mole Cricket or Camellia, but they still kind of do work in synergy with some of the older cards, like the Sacred Tree. With Blessing, I think Blessing is like a middle-of-the-pack support card for Naturia, right? I think it was like 10 years ago rather than 20, but yeah, the point I'm making is like legacy support that's retrained, that's decent, still can be viable.
I think in regards to legacy support, it is just something that we have to live with, right? That is just something that comes with...
Original design was tribute to X. Yeah, there you go. More Cricket tributes.
Sometimes do not live up to the current times.
Got him.
And it's just something like... We're accepting this sort of thing with new archetypes, right? They're making new archetypes. It's a very normal thing for us that some of them are better and some of them are worse, right? Why is it different with legacy support? Why is it different with legacy support that like we're so disappointed that not every legacy support is meta or is competitively viable?
I guess the question, because I guess it's the question of who is it for? Why print them? That's it. Why make the legacy support if it's not viable? That's it. For the pet deckers, I mean, sure, they can play around with some new tools, but it's not relevant. It's not good enough, right? So that's the question. That's the big question is like, who is it for?
Because I'm not sure. At least that's what I feel like the argument is here, right? Like Yu-Gi-Oh has a lot of archetypes that aren't good enough to be meta. Because Yu-Gi-Oh encourages people to get attached to decks. Okay. I mean, you're not entirely wrong. I'm attached to decks. I have my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh decks. I don't go about it in the way that I'm like disappointed every single day that they're not making new Paleo support, or that Paleo is not the best deck in every single Yu-Gi-Oh format. I do think that there is a lot of it is up to the way you handle this hobby yourself, right? Every League of Legends player has a favorite champion. Yeah, I don't know if that is something that is exclusive to Yu-Gi-Oh. I even think like this is something that's probably true for every single card game where every single player has like their favorite archetype or their favorite play style or whatever. Like I'm sure if I asked a Magic player, they could tell me like specifically, hey, the way this one deck played the game, that just hit the spot. That's my favorite deck of all time. I wish it was like that again. Heck, I have that myself for like Hearthstone or Runeterra. Like I have
I feel like I'll go in
have,
circles if I repeat
those
myself
kind of
here,
decks
so I'm
for
not
Hearthstone.
going
Like,
to.
no
So
Hearthstone
just
deck is ever gonna,
let
like,
it let,
do it
let
for
him
me
cook.
Like Grim Patron did in 20, was it 15 or 16, or Freeze Mage or something like that. Like I'm aware those times are not coming back. Yeah, or dude, Miracle Rogue with the Tinker Oil and Violet Teacher. You know, but that doesn't mean I can't enjoy, like, if I wanted to. I'm not playing it at the moment, but like, I could enjoy.
Oh my
it.
god,
It's
Jade
just,
Druid
guys,
was
very
so
natural.
cringe.
It's very natural, like, development in card games, because I mean, this is
Imagine
reality
playing
check,
against a
but, like, in
token
order for
deck
these games
that
to
just
function,
had
they gotta
infinite
find ways to sell
tokens
you new
that got
cards.
bigger. My god, that
They
deck
gotta
was
find
cancer.
ways to make new cards and make the old ones, like, you know, like Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have rotation in theory, but in practice that does need to happen, right? It does need to happen. It's unfortunate, and I get why it's frustrating if your favorite archetype is not really rotated out, but practically it's rotated out because the new cards are just like better, or it just hasn't
Wait,
gotten
is Josh
support in a
being
while. Like, yeah, if
pro-rotation
you're
right
a big
now?
fan of Six Samurai, it's frustrating that the Six Samurai support isn't super meta. I encounter this a lot of times, even with new archetypes, where a new archetype comes out and I try it and I'm like, that's really fun. It's a really fun concept. Vanquish Soul was a great example. Someone brought it up earlier. I think it was Paul. Six Samurai, Vanquish Soul was a deck that I thought was super fun. It kind of like hit one of the spots where what I really like about Yu-Gi-Oh decks, where like a little bit of a lower ceiling, grindy, resource loops, you know, like a lot of interaction on the opponent's turn without actually having like Omni negates or anything like that. Just like fun little back and forth, bounce your guys, pop some cards, draw an extra card with Heavy Borger here and there. Really fun concept. I enjoyed it a lot. And yes, I was disappointed that that deck wasn't better, right? Like that is a thing. I do get that. It's just, I don't think that is unique to Yu-Gi-Oh! And I don't even think that is necessarily a problem, because it kind of has to be that way. The card designers in that sense, they can't make every deck broken, and they can't make...
I can't believe how Stockholmed we are, where he just sat and talked about how much he loved a particular design choice of the deck and how it functions and how healthy he thinks it is, like Vanquish Soul, and then just be like, well, I don't know what the solution is to that. I guess that's just how it is. I can't believe, like, Josh, you identified the problem. How you can be okay with it? Like that's the point here.
Make every deck bad. There's just got to be some better and some worse ones. And in certain times, if a deck releases that you really enjoy and it isn't as good as you were hoping for, I get that's frustrating, but that's not really unusual, or, you know, like that just happens. And it happens in every single game. Like you're gonna have times where a new archetype releases in match.
Didn't he say at the start of the video, oh, just because it's always been that way doesn't make it a good argument, right? Like that's what he's doing right now. He's saying, well, it's always been that way. It's just how it is.
Or a new thing releases in One Piece or something, and you look at it and you're like, damn, that's cool. I really want to play that, and then it turns out not as good as you were hoping for. Of course, it's natural, but wouldn't it be great to have a format to play those decks that you like with new support, so they can still sell?
I think what's his name? It's partially related, but this was a great meme here. No way to prevent this, says only format where this regularly happens. I can't believe he just gassed up Vanquish Soul and then said, well, it's not viable because I guess that's just the way it is supposed to be. Like, that's crazy, Josh.
Sell you new cards. Okay. What would that format look like?
What is the next, like, 20 minutes of this video, by the way? Because I feel like we've kind of reached the end of the discussion points here.
What's the suggestion? Because you're making a very, very vague suggestion. So you want to have a format where Six Samurai, arbitrary example, right? Six Samurai is supposed to be the best deck in your format, or at least meta competitive, like competitively viable, right? But you want the old cards to be legal so you can play with your favorites, and you also want the new cards to be legal. How does that work? Because if the old Six Samurai cards are legal and the new Six Samurai cards are legal, why are all the other cards not legal that are in Modern? And who decides that your Six Samurai support is in there, but the Yubel Legacy support is not in there, because then your Six Samurai deck doesn't compete with Yubel either? Does no main format achieve that? You tested it? I think the only...
He's just describing an alt format. Like, it is, yeah, huh?
only way to achieve that is to find like-minded people and just be like, yeah, let's play our pet decks. Like, you're gonna have to do some work yourself.
Yeah, you can do that, okay, of course, but, you know, it is ideally Konami's job to create these environments for these other formats, right?
I guess, in that sense, like, because the Six Samurai deck, I'm just using that as an example because they used it, but, like, you're not happy that you have to do too much work to win locals with, because it's not good enough in Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Sure, all right. But you are also not willing to just play with friends. Just like saying, like, hey, I want to play Six Samurai, you play your Battling Boxers or whatever, and then we're gonna have good games. I have
Yeah, you can do that, but it would be nice if there was an environment for it that was encouraged.
problems wrapping my head around
That's what people are saying, right?
the concept. Because at the end of the day, that should probably just be a community-driven thing. That's Heart of the Underdog.
Why does it have to be community-driven, though? Why can't it be official?
Yeah, and so what exactly is Heart of the Underdog? Heart of the Underdog is just a format where they ban some meta decks, right?
Exactly. Hit the nail on the head.
Theory, yeah. I don't know. I do think a fair argument is that Yu-Gi-Oh has. I think we can all. I think let's try to.
Wait, he just said what it is. Someone told him what Heart of the Underdog is, and then he just moved on. He didn't engage with it. What?
Bring this to a conclusion that hopefully most of us can agree on. All right, like whether that's a problem for modern Yu-Gi-Oh or not aside, I think we can all agree.
He just said
that
okay.
Not every archetype is created equal. All right, some are more expensive than others, some are more meta viable than others. All right, that is definitely true for Yu-Gi-Oh, and for some people that creates certain frustrations, whether it is the barrier of entry in order to play or compete, or because they like a certain archetype and it's just not as good as other archetypes. Fine, that creates frustration, which is fair enough. The question at that point is, what would the solution be? Because alternative formats could do that depending on what exactly the format would be. And
That's it. Yes. Alternative formats could do that depending on what the solution would be. They could do that. Yes, that's what we want. That's it. End sentence. Next point. That's it. That's what we want, right? Rotation, alternative format, some other way to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Something adjacent to the current advanced constructed format. I think that's the best way to address this. Most people would argue, right?
retro formats, which is they have been adding at least one alternative way to play Yu-Gi-Oh recently, even with official like tournaments.
This is, I think, exactly the problem, right? I think Josh has conflated people who hate that a meta exists with those who want to play a meta with weaker decks. Exactly. A lot of people want to be able to play. Don't mind that there's a meta. You know, of course, there will always be a meta, no matter what happens, no matter what the discussion is, no matter what the point is. But I think people want a lower power version of that, or a different meta once in a while to spice things up, etc., etc. That, I think, is exactly it. A format officially supported by Konami, can you think of it? Is it even possible? Surely not in Yu-Gi-Oh! Exactly.
That's Time Wizard. The problem with Time Wizard is...
Guys, I am absolutely bursting. I need to pee. I'm sorry. BRB. Piss gang, piss gang, piss gang, piss gang, piss gang.
Or like the criticism with Time Wizard here is that you cannot play those new cards in Time Wizard. So basically, all of this amounts to we're asking for another alternative format where you can play with the new cards, but it's got like a different sort of power scaling to it. So like the rogue, the tiers are like a little like either flipped or some is like taken out at the top so that you can play your tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, whatever it is kind of decks in those sort of formats more.
Yes.
And I think to that I say, like, I can get behind it because I personally do feel like there is a lot of ways to enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh! And I do think in some ways it's even criminal that like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is only, quote unquote, only being played and enjoyed in two different ways. Either competitive, like
yes,
this advanced Yu-Gi-Oh! Format, or...
He's getting it.
I do think having more ways to play the game would just be a net positive, especially if it
makes
people more interested in decks like...
He's got it. Yes, he's got it. So why has he spent the last 10 minutes going in circles around this point?
Right, because, I mean, it's definitely true. You pull these cards in modern booster packs, you're like, what am I going to do with that? Nothing.
Yes!
You know, fair point. That is...
We got there eventually!
That is true. You pull these cards, and you're, as a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Player, you're asking yourself, what am I supposed to do with this? And as a Time Wizard fan or whatever, you're also asking yourself, what am I supposed to do?
Yes!
So that point...
Yes! That's a problem! Yes! He sees it!
That point I get behind. These cards do feel...
Yes! He gets what? Yes! Woo! He did it!
Feel, quote unquote, I don't want to call them useless, but you do have to put in a lot of work, and it's still gonna be an uphill battle to play these cards. Right?
That's it. That's it, Josh. That's all people have been saying. We don't know what the perfect exact solution is there. We don't know what exactly the best way to handle this is, but that is the problem. That is the thing that people have identified that they've laid out. We don't want to play, like, you know, go back in time and play the old decks because Time Wizard exists. You can do that already. People want to play with the new cool support. People want to play with these flashy new cards for their historically favorite decks. How do you play today? Well, you can't play an advanced constructed format because they're too weak and they don't really fit into the current metagame. So what is the solution for that? I don't know. That's for the game designers to come up with. But enough of us have identified and seen that as a problem, and we want a solution to it. And that's it. That's all we have to say. Roll credits.
Yeah, I do get that. I do understand that. I just, to me, it doesn't feel like that much of a problem, but I am also not really a fan.
Well, okay, so, I mean, yeah, he doesn't see it as a problem because naturally, like, that's not the type of gameplay he plays, which is a fair enough point, right? Like, that's not how he plays the game. So to him, on a personal level, yeah, it makes sense why this is a nothing burger, right? I get that. But at the same time, you know, we've all recognized and understood that for large large number of the player base, that is an issue.
Affected by it. That's the thing. It does, I think for most, for these kind of things, it does probably just take some community effort to solve. If that's something that so many people are interested in, it is something that also it would work, you know? And
join
I mean,
LCS, guys. It's fun.
In one instance, it has even worked to the point where it eventually turned
This is just this video is just a marketing ploy for LCS, guys. Sign up.
into an official format. Isn't that what happened with like Commander and Magic? Wasn't that just like a community-driven format that people just invented and went like, hey, this is a fun way to play Magic? And then people just played that, and it turned into an official format that they now even support at a competitive scale. And that also happened with Time Wizard, right? Like Time Wizard was not something that, like, before you say, hey, yeah, but Konami would never do this. No, they did. They did do that with Time Wizard. Time Wizard did not start because Konami said like, hey, now go play GOAT format. The people in the community started playing GOAT format. They sat down with their friends or went to locals, brought a GOAT format deck, and just sat down and played. And people saw that, and now there's official Time Wizard formats, right? It is a development that's happening. What I don't really understand is...
So I think that's the one of the problems, right? Is that we have to like... There has to be a community effort and drive to create another format for Yu-Gi-Oh! That people can enjoy. But it has to be a unified front because Konami are very ignorant when it comes to change and things like that. And that's a big ask, and it's a lot to do. But I hope they actually push forward and do it sometime, you know?
The exact, like, I guess I do understand the points, now that we've talked about it for like
But that's why I do Cube,
They
personally.
really support it, let's be honest. There's no...
Like that, I've just given up, right? Like, you can't really bring this thing to the modern competitive scope. Like, that's just why I enjoy doing Cube now at this point, because it's just more of a fun way for me to play the game personally.
Product directly for it. There's like hundreds of
exactly. It's not our job to fix the game.
They're supporting it,
right? You're a customer. You're a paying customer. You're a player. If you don't like something about the game, you can criticize and offer feedback. It's not my job to come up with a solution. It's not my job to fix the game, right? Like, that's a very important takeaway here as well. Konami need to listen to what we are saying, because this is a problem that a huge number of people have identified, and what I'm saying right now, like, and they need to address that, right? I don't know what the solution, because I'm not smart enough to come up with the game design nuances and technicalities on how to fix that, because I'm not a game designer. But yeah, problem identified by customer. Business needs to address that, otherwise they lose customer. They are losing customers. They have lost customers to One Piece, etc., etc.
Dedicating venue space, judges, and all that kind of stuff through Time Wizard. Yes, it could be more, but of course they're like supporting it. There's a nostalgia pool in the recent rarity collections. There's prize pools, there's judges, there's venue space. Like, yeah, it could be better, and it's getting better. It's a development. It's just not gone from like 0 to infinite in the span of like a month or something. But like, of course they're supporting Time Wizard. Like, what's your argument? They just want the Time Wizard YCS. I want it too. I would love a Time Wizard YCS. But to say that Time Wizard is not supported, it's just like you're losing me with that argument. Like, there's a lot. Like, I feel like people are always way too extreme and way too judgmental with their with these sort of things. Like, this sort of stuff takes time, and it also takes a lot of community effort in these sort of instances where they're...
Well, I mean, to be fair, you could argue how much time is a long time, right? Like, Time Wizard has been officially recognized for years at this point, right? This is an alternative thing, because we're not talking about, like, an alternative format at this stage. We're talking about... Well, we are talking about an alternative format, but not alternative to modern. We're talking about just, like, Time Wizard, which is snapshots of historical formats. How long is time at this point, right? Like, it has been a while, and people have asked for, like, a major Time Wizard-style event. Like, why can't we get a Time Wizard YCS? There's clearly demand for it. You know, that would be a good step in the direction of creating an alternative format. Imagine the heart of the underdog YCS. I think an important thing that is very specific to recognize here, just to be careful with this, is Konami do have like a budget, and they only have X number of YCSs that they can hold a year. So if they dedicate some of that budget to holding a YCS for an alternative format, you don't want to risk as a business being in a situation where you are alienating your one portion of the customer base to please a different portion of the customer base, because it could be seen as like trying to hit two birds with one stone, or like trying to hit this like middle ground. But sometimes the problem with compromise and middle ground is that you just upset both portions of the player. Right? So it's like a lot of people want this like hard the underdog style, rogue enforced, thriving format. But Konami's compromise in that would potentially host like a YCS for Edison, right? As a compromise. But kind of what you're doing there is you're sort of upsetting two different factions within your player base. So rather than pleasing everyone, one group of people, you've actually just kind of not really you've kind of not really hit the mark for 2 factions in the player base, right? So that's an important thing to recognize. It really is just like budget, I think, is what a lot of that could come down to. If you have 3 YCSs in a calendar year, and you can only do 3 YCSs in a calendar year, that's not a lot. So now your product is just not relevant for one of those YCSs. Let's say YCS Birmingham coming up was an Edison YCS. If you're a European player, you potentially might have not had any reason whatsoever to pick up crossover breakers. Because some people only play the meta deck so they can go from event to event, major events, right? So in February, you have like a big YCS and you play it for that. And then a lot of people wouldn't have any reason to actually have picked up those cards. So, you know, that's something to consider.
Look, Yu-Gi-Oh is doing fine at a competitive level, right? Like they're making Yu-Gi-Oh people, it's received well overwhelmingly, right? There's 2,000 plus people come into every single European YCS. YCS Birmingham is sold out like a month in advance, or even longer. I don't know how long it's been sold out for, but I think it is sold out, and it's doing well, right? And if people want other ways to play Yu-Gi-Oh, it is something that you need to make Konami see the demand for. It's not something they're just going to do out of nowhere when their main product is just doing fine. Make Smogon, but for Yu-Gi-Oh. I mean, here's the thing. I do think there's more ways to enjoy.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a little bit of like Josh turning around and being like, well, you fix it. And it's like, well, no, it's not for us to fix. Like, you know, I think there is a big enough demand. It's not like a unified front. Like, we haven't got like a petition going on behalf of these content creators, these pro players all saying, hey, Konami, we want domain format to be a thing, right? That would probably help, and it might definitely work. But ultimately, like I said, problem is identified. Business has to address the problem identified by the customers. Otherwise, customers leave and go somewhere else. Which those customers are the mid-core players that Paul thinks he's identified in this video and in his tweets.
Yu-Gi-Oh, and I do wish they would support it more, and we could probably hold even more players if they did.
You personally should fix the game. I tried, guys. Sign up for LCS.
No, I know what Smogon is. I know how it works. I do. I'm just not entirely sure what to really make of this discussion, other than people wish that every single Yu-Gi-Oh card printed was useful in some sort of context.
In an ideal world, you need to... It's really weird, right? Because what I'm suggesting and talking about now is uprooting the entire fabric and understanding of what makes a booster box. You know, from the business perspective of how essentially like the gambling aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh works is you need to have a bad card. Because when you pull the bad card, it makes you want to be like, damn, go again. Open another pack, and now you get a good card. Like, at a fundamental level, that is what your brain is doing, right? Not really? Yes, it is. That is literally how card packs and boosters are designed. This isn't up for debate. This is discussion. So, in my world, it would be nice if every single card in a pack that you pulled was useful in some type of way. Either by drafting, either by alternative format, or the modern format, or etc., etc. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not anywhere near a middle ground of having something like that. Yu-Gi-Oh!, like I mentioned earlier, is when you pull a card, it is only viable and usable in the modern advanced constructed format. It has no other use other than that. So that niche has to be filled by some other ways, either alternative formats, alternative game modes, etc., etc. But I would like to see, like, essentially just product uprooted, because I don't like the way, like, product works, you know? And Yu-Gi-Oh! Encourages you to not buy the packs because of that. Yeah, exactly. Like, why do people buy packs? Vendors, I feel like, are the ones that buy mass amounts of product so that they can minimize their percentage chances of not opening the right cards to then sell the singles. And all competitive players probably buy singles, or they buy, like, a case hoping to pull full cores and sell the rest. But that's like big boy money, right? If you're willing to like drop hundreds and potentially thousands on like a cases for a new set.
So that just in case anyone likes a certain archetype or a certain card that was printed, they have a way to play that card. Which I think is, in a way, understandable, in another way, a little unrealistic. Not 100%, but more than currently, you'll oftentimes get an entire set where like 1 or maybe 2 cards are actually good, and literally the rest is pack filler. I mean, that is, no, that's not true. If there are sets...
Hold on, what is he disagreeing with here?
100%, but more than currently, you'll oftentimes get an entire set where like 1 or maybe 2 cards are actually good, and literally the rest is pack filler. I I mean, that is, no, that's not true. If
Kinda true. No? Look at Supreme Darkness, the next core set. What's useful from there? 100 card set. What's like useful out of it? What would be considered a good pull? Like 10 of the cards there? 12 of the cards there? That's a very low number for a 100 card set. What are you doing with the rest of those cards?
there are sets where not a lot of new additions are being made to the game, except for a couple of cards, but those are usually
value-wise,
sets,
like 5 of them. Yeah,
they
exactly.
do have other purposes of just adding new relevant cards to it. There's
The
almost,
Shredder.
I don't think you can name a set right now that outright had just 1 or 2 useful cards and nothing else in there. Wasn't Default
I feel like
that?
Suda
yes,
is close to
There's
that
bad Yu-Gi-Oh sets.
description,
That is not the argument
Josh.
I made, but 1 or 2 cards is a stretch.
But I'm not trying to judge because I'm not a TCU
Legends
player.
of
I'm
the
not
Deep
trying to
with
like
Droplet. That
talk
is
too
probably
much
the
about
closest
that.
to it. Also, the legendary duelist with Baron the Fleur. But you know what? They've gotten the feedback on that. They've gotten the memo, right? The legendary duelist sets were bad. I agree with you there. But that is something that's also changed. Like the side sets have improved since then. The Baron set had Lyrelast, which became a meta deck at the time. Yeah, I think people just like to exaggerate a lot to get their points through, but I don't think it's a great way of arguing. Like, I think
I don't think it's an exaggeration. I don't know what the number has to be. In my mind, it should be 100%. Every card in a set should be useful, viable in some type of way, in some type of format. Whether it's modern, whether it's alternative, whether it's Heart of the Underdog, whether it's draft. I would like to see most cards in a set be useful in some shape or form. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's the polar opposite end of that spectrum, right? It's like literally a handful. A 100... Think about how big that number is. 100 cards? And there's like 5 of them that you would be okay with pulling? Maybe 10 if you're trying to pull like a Crystron core or something? You know what I mean? Like... We're not even up to a quarter of a set being like good pulls, good card to have. Like, that is a big number of cards that are just useless. Toilet paper, right? I think that's a big problem with product.
I think if like even for this, it's just exaggerated, right? Like you can play 6 Samurai. I don't know. I'm struggling to find more in this discussion other than it just feels like we are warming up some old points that are still relevant and fair enough, but like, for example, Farfa's response just boiled down to Yu-Gi-Oh! Expensive, which, yes, expensive game, true, but not really what we're talking about right now. And fillers. I would have lost to 6 Sam in a regional with Fire King Snake Eye if they didn't misplay. Yeah, see, but they wanted to win even if they're misplaying, because that's what Farfa said. Farfa says he doesn't want to work for winning against the meta decks.
How did he extrapolate that? That's so disingenuous, Josh. What? I didn't say you should be able to win games without trying. Like, what is he talking about? That is really bad faith, Josh.
So the argument is they should have won with a cheaper, worse deck while playing worse at you than you.
Where did he get that?
That's what should have happened. That's not what he's trying to say. I know that's not what he's trying to say. I'm joking. We're basically done.
Oh, okay.
Master Duel is great for all these decks. Master Duel is great for all these decks.
German humor be like, lying. Ja, das ist ein gut joke, genau. What was this joke? Like...
And especially, Master Duel is finding ways to get people to play some of these decks, not all of them. In like events, for example, there's definitely been events where decks were useful that weren't like
Divorce stream? Don't worry, I'm
relevant in
gonna
other
beat his
contexts,
ass in
because they just
20
make, like,
minutes in
custom
draft.
ban lists and stuff like that for events. But the argument is it would also be nice to have that used for physical cards, right? Like, because you're not using physical cards for any of that. The price is a good argument. OCG doesn't have all these complaints because people can easily change decks and experiencing the game because it's cheaper. I feel like you especially.
Okay, so just because I'm starting to be a little bit low on time at this point, I can't believe we just about got to the end of this, man. This is gonna be like a 2-hour react. But yeah, I think the last 5 minutes of this is most likely just gonna be circularly talking about. Listen to this last. Is there more? Okay, all right. We've got this far. We might as well get through it. Okay, all right, fair.
We have not made many good points and just yapped a whole lot today. Like the OCG has its very own set of complaints and its very own set of problems, and specific.
By the way, can I just say from, I haven't directly spoken to OCG players because language barrier, but from all of the really bad English Google translating I've seen on Twitter from OCG players, they have the exact same complaints and problems that we are identifying, by the way. Imagine OCG players of all people complaining about the cost of the game. I know, right? But they bringing the same points: one card combos, gameplay issues, rogue decks, cost. Reading through OCG Google Translate, they have very similar problems. You know,
specifically in regards to rogue decks, like the price is like, yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh is expensive. How often do you want to repeat it? Is it not possible that like people still?
How often do you want to repeat it? All the time, constantly, until Konami does something about it. Forever. And I've taken a stand personally, and I'm speaking with my wallet as well, because I am not spending money. That's how. How do you fix a problem? Keep bringing it up. What's the solution? Because what's the alternative, Josh? Quit the game? Quit the game? I basically have quit TCG, right? You know what I mean?
Enjoy the game. He's not completely wrong though. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying Yu-Gi-Oh isn't expensive, but I'm saying there's more to the game than just Huvalos is $70. This game is dead to me. Don't ever talk to me about it again. Josh doesn't have a 9 to 5.
But that's, Josh, that is the deal breaker for so many people. You don't hear about them, you don't talk to them anymore because they're not within your community anymore. They've left. They're playing fucking Luffy Spirit Bomb Turbo. They're playing Donald Duck Control. They've already gone because of this problem, right? Like, yeah, how many times do you want to repeat it? You keep repeating it because we will keep bleeding players to this reason. We should absolutely keep talking about it and keep bringing it up.
His job allows him to get better at Yu-Gi-Oh! Naturally, he doesn't get it. Oh yeah, it's not like
Luffy
I played
would
Yu-Gi-Oh!
never
for 20
Spirit
years
Bomb.
before I became a streamer. The chatting has been crazy today. The thing is, it's a controversial topic. On the one hand, I find it hard to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Card prices. Like, that entire discussion is something that I mean, I'm not really avoiding it, but I have a hard time talking about it because I personally...
It's because he's so rich, you know. It's because he's a multimillionaire YouTuber. Like, of course it's difficult to talk about this. Like, he doesn't understand the plight and the struggle of the average working duelist. He doesn't know what it's like to have to skip electricity bills, to have to sit in the darkness for 30 days because you can't afford electricity that month, so you can buy one engraver. He's not like us. He doesn't get the struggle. He is unaware of the problems of the working duelist that we go through. He doesn't know what it's like to have to skip meals, to have to not have breakfast every other day of the week so that you can buy one engraver. He doesn't get it. He's not like us.
Personally, I'm not in everyone's shoes. I don't experience it the same way that other people experience it. And I feel kind of bad just ignoring it and just saying like, hey, can't we just enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh! Ignoring the price? Because the price is a big deal for a lot of people, and I understand that. And it's completely fair enough to not want to spend the money on Moltrami Pubalas. At the same time, I do not like the fact that like some people look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Just through that lens and nothing else. The way I look at Yu-Gi-Oh! is just, I look at it...
Holy shit. You did not just say what I think you said.
At the same time, I do not like the fact that like some people look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Just through that lens and nothing else. The way I look at...
I do not like that some people look through the lens of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is too expensive and nothing else. That is the reality for some people. What do you mean? For some people, that is the deal-breaking part of the game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is too expensive? I'll go play something else. Like, okay, I'm sorry you don't like that, but... Okay, to be fair, this is edited. I can see that there was a jump cut. Maybe there's some context missing here. But brother, that is a very important lens for some people. Picking a hobby has to be within people's budget for the majority of the population, right?
Look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Is
Just
just
charge higher
through the lens
tariffs?
of someone who enjoys
true,
the game.
Trump,
and
true.
whenever I talk about certain cards or certain aspects of the game, there's always just so much negativity based on just the card price. Which is like, on the one hand, a fair argument. On the other hand, it doesn't mean Moltrami Pubalas is
Remember one of the first locals I went to, there was a guy asking whether he should buy his driver's license or 3 Dark Destroyer. What do you mean buy your driver's license? Do you mean like take his test? Also, how expensive is a driver's license? 3 Dark Destroyer? Isn't that like 200 euros or something back in the day?
terrible for Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it costs $70, right?
Tough choice,
and,
man. Tough choice.
And that's tough. It's a tough space to be in.
It's like 500
euros. I
euros.
don't really know
What?
exactly how to handle yet. Because when I
Okay, in what sense? Like, what do you mean, like, buying it? Like, as in just buying the physical card? Because over here, you just get your license when you pass your test. You don't buy it. You don't pay for it. Right? You pay your lessons. You pay for the test. I think it's like 200 these days. It's really expensive. It's like 150 pounds or something just to take the test. But if you do the test, if you succeed, they give you the license. 2,000 euros in Finland for the mandatory shit? The whole process? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, that's normal, right? Like, yeah, driving is fucking expensive. Driving lessons plus 2 exams is 900 euros. Is that it? That's cheap. I think it's like £35 an hour or something now. It's absurd in the UK these days to do driving lessons. Back when I was younger, dude, I think I paid £18 an hour, which is insane to think about now.
I make a video or when I have a discussion about like the Fiendsmith engine being fun to play with.
But I did get my
or
license in Dragon Ruler format, so
or most Army Fuvalas having positive.
It's funny how many like references in my life and milestones are based off of Yu-Gi-Oh formats. 30 years ago was good times. Yeah, Dragon Rulers was 400 years ago, guys. It's crazy.
Impact on Yu-Gi-Oh because it like slows down decks and so on and so forth. 80%, or I mean, it's probably exaggerated, but it feels like 70 to 80% of the comment section is just going to be like, yeah, maybe you're crazy for calling Fiendsmith a cool card. That thing is $50, or I can't believe you're calling Fuvalos healthy for Yu-Gi-Oh when it's $100 at the release. You know what I mean? It's rough for me because they're not wrong. I wish it was more accessible. And believe me when I say I would. Polsar, I'm not talking to you like right now. You're just not responding. You're just throwing me off. All right? Like I'm talking to everyone right now. There's 2,000 people right now. It's not about you. All right? I'm not going to bring up your chat logs because I don't care. That's my train of thought. I don't know. Where was I? Okay,
I don't care about you.
You were talking about Fuvala saying greater pricing. Yeah. Believe me when I say, in an ideal world, I would love for everyone to have access to all the Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Right? I would love for everyone to be able to have engravers and Fuvaloses. I don't want to win against anyone because they don't have access to the best cards. It's not a good feeling. I think that Yu-Gi-Oh should be accessible to as many people as possible because I love this hobby and I wish as many people as possible could play it. Unfortunately, that is not a reality that we live in, and it's not something that I personally can change other than. And this sort of discussion feels like something we're warming up since literally 2008. You know, like that is a thing that's Yu-Gi-Oh has been like this forever. And once again, that's not a defense at all. But it's just.
So why do you keep saying it? It's not a defense to say it's always been this way, but it has always been this way. Why do you keep saying it then?
What I'm saying is this discussion is very old to me. It feels very warmed up every time. That's not to say that people.
Well, then you don't have to talk about it, I get, Josh. Like, it's that simple, right? Like, if you don't like something, you know, scroll past. He saw the Team APS video. You could have just scrolled past it. I don't know. Like,
people shouldn't bring up valid.
Like, I get it's a fair enough point that he's bringing. To him personally, it's not a problem. You know, it's not an issue for him. That's fine. But then you don't need to take part in the discussion for it if you don't care about it, right?
Criticism over and over and over again.
It's his job. He has to talk about it. That is true. Streaming is a paid job. We have to yap. The yapception is indeed a inevitability, like taxes.
It eventually changes. But for me personally, it feels like, as someone who's been around for so long, it just feels tiring to talk about a new Yu-Gi-Oh card. And the only thing that people...
Josh, my brother, if you don't like something, don't do it. It's tiring to talk about how expensive. Well, then stop doing it, my boy.
Will see, they're almost blinded by it. Is that Yu-Gi-Oh is expensive. Which is not wrong, but is also not helpful, right? It doesn't add to any sort of discussion about the card game itself, the one that I'm interested in, right? Like the things I'm interested with Yu-Gi-Oh is not like how expensive are these cards. The thing that I like is that like how these cards interact, you know what I mean? And ironically, my view of this discussion, there's too many cards in a short space of time, so mid the decks never really get a chance to thrive. Very few events also make people only play the safer best decks and never experiment. The release...
I kind of touched on that earlier, but that is one of the biggest issues as well, because there's so few events. There isn't really a reason to experiment. You always want to give yourself the best chance. Like, if there was 100 YCSs, there was a chance you would enter, like, a couple of them with a fun deck just to see how you would do with it. But if you only have 2 events, then you're going to try your absolute hardest and play the best strategies, and you're never really going to give a chance to something like 6M, as an example. So yeah, just kind of repeating what was said earlier.
Schedule, I do sometimes wish was a little bit slower. I can get behind that. Like, I do think sometimes we could just have longer formats or release cards in, like, maybe these sets don't have to have 100 cards or something like that. But yeah. Have the game being slower would also help some people keep up with it if you're not as invested and you are not, like, super, like, I guess also mid-core, right? Like, you're not a hardcore Yu-Gi-Oh player that keeps up. Like, new cards are being printed. You're going to be, like, looking at the set in advance. And,
like, depending on when a YCS is scheduled in for in the calendar, there are some events that you just don't get a televised event with a new set. Or you get a new set, but it also, like, ends up with a new ban list or a side set. Just because of how fast, like, the game moves and how infrequent we have YCSs, at least in EU.
And being up to date with every single new card that comes out, right? Kind of what I'm doing on stream as well.
I'm not going to Orlando.
Also, just, like, if you're...
I'm going to Birmingham,
for
though.
a couple of months, it's not like 4 sets have come out.
Birmingham!
One. But, yeah. When you can't play for 6 months, it's super hard to get back into the game. Yeah. Yeah, that is... I mean, I've never tried that. The only thing I can speak of is when I took a break during during the pandemic. It did take a while to get back in, even for someone who's been playing for a very...
Josh took a break during the pandemic for Yu-Gi-Oh? Well, why was he on a break? What happened? Was he on holiday?
Very long. Will this be a
Is
topic
it getting
in the
milk?
podcast? For this Friday, we had a different topic planned, and we even have a guest for this Friday, so I don't think it's going to be for this week. But this went on for way longer than I wanted it to go, to be honest. I feel like we've lost our train of thought and just ended up. And this is what annoys me sometimes. It's not that this price discussion of Yu-Gi-Oh is just like not necessary and the game isn't expensive. It's just every single discussion about Yu-Gi-Oh will eventually just turn into a Yu-Gi-Oh price discussion. No matter.
And that right there, Josh, is the problem. Why does everything sort of boil down and come back to the economic side of Yu-Gi-Oh? Because it is such an important aspect of it. Because it is such a big deal. Like, it is intertwined between everything. Gameplay-wise, alternative formats, the possibility of rotation, you know, set design, product, release schedule. Everything comes back to money. It's the reality of just, like, the world we live in and the capitalist society, but it does all just boil down to that. So yeah, it is very important.
No matter what you do, whether you talk about mold charmies, whether you talk about the mechanics of the Fiendsmith engine, the viability of legacy support, the existence of alternate Yu-Gi-Oh formats, Time Wizard, no matter what you talk about, it always turns into a Yu-Gi-Oh expensive discussion. And that is both simultaneously fair enough and annoying, I think, is how I feel about that. Like, and it's hard to convey that information because people are not wrong when they mention it, but it's still not really what I want to talk about right now. You know what I mean?
Can I just say his editor has the YouTube subscribe like plug thing here, but they are linking his Twitch channel. I think that's very funny. They're just using the wrong like URL for the wrong element, you know? Subscribe to my YouTube, twitch.tv for anyway. All right. Yapathon done, the Yapception React and the thing cycling of content has been complete. Maybe we can get Josh to react to me reacting, and then we can react back to the reaction of the reaction. But let's go do something else now.